Chapter 2404. Oh, you don't know what blood crystal is, so how do you know it's spiritual wine? Guan Peng ignored the small sword that was enveloped by the fire net and continued to speak patiently. What do you mean? Xiao Hua was a bit anxious, as if he had something on his mind. Little friend Xiao, don't be anxious. Guan Peng laughed. My life is in your hands, but I'm not anxious. What are you anxious about? Could it be that you're afraid I won't be able to complete the deal with you if I die? This. Xiao Hua was a bit speechless. Hee, I don't mean anything by saying this. I just want to tell you that just like you know blood crystal is the best spiritual wine in Xuanyan school, but you don't have the chance to taste it. My flying sword is indeed trapped by you, but if you want to kill me, you won't have the chance either. At the very least, I can use a sword cultivation secret technique to drag you down with me. I don't believe you, Xiao Hua said resolutely. You don't believe me? You can try. Guan Peng leisurely took a sip of spiritual wine, squinted his eyes, and quietly looked at Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua waved his sun leaf fan, and flames burst out from the fan, like a roaring fire phoenix. However, this fire phoenix flew up a few feet and then fell back down. Xiao Hua sat down with a smile. How could I be an unintelligent person, falling into your trap? Hee, little friend Xiao is indeed powerful. Guan Peng didn't miss the opportunity to flatter Xiao Hua, as expected of a terrifying phoenix. It's nothing. Xiao Hua's eyes were filled with pride. I'm only here to negotiate with you. If I take your life, it's not worth it. Oh, right? I still haven't asked for your name? I'm Guan Peng from Flying Spirit Mountain Village. Guan Peng didn't hide and said generously. Good, Senior Guan. Xiao Hua also cupped his hands and said, Senior is older than me. Here, there's no difference between Dao and sword. I'll call you Senior. Little friend Xiao is indeed talented. Guan Peng smiled and returned the greeting. All right, I won't waste any more time. Xiao Hua raised his eyebrows and said, When I used the secret technique to come in, the sword cultivation disciples were cultivating. Someone might come in a while. I'm very scared. It's good that little friend Xiao knows. Guan Peng was still smiling. You and I are only here to discuss a deal. If both sides benefit, then I won't cause any more problems. We can't talk about mutual benefits right now. Xiao Hua didn't hide anything and said very honestly, Senior Guan can only use his life to agree to this Zhao's conditions. Go ahead, this old man is listening. Guan Peng did not hesitate and asked in a low voice. Xiao Hua thought for a moment. His eyes turned slightly, as if he was thinking of something. Guan Peng saw it clearly. Ha, Senior Guan. Xiao Hua looked around and said with a smile, It seems that there are 3 senior illusory swords in the Gale Snowfield, right? Where did they go? Them? Guan Peng sneered. They naturally went to Yinyang. They naturally went to the place they wanted to go. If they were here, how could this old man? Yinyang? Xiao Hua frowned. However, he couldn't stay here any longer. He wanted to use a thunderous method to restrain Guan Peng, or even kill him. The problem was that he wanted to know where Xiao Mao was taken to buy the illusory swordsman. He didn't know if his Buddhist sect divine ability would be able to obtain the information he wanted from Guan Peng's soul. After all, a sword cultivator had fought with a soul cultivator for many years. Xiao Hua couldn't take that risk. Since they aren't here, this Xiao can rest assured. Xiao Hua nodded slightly. Guan Peng suddenly asked, Could it be that you didn't encounter it? Who? Xiao Hua was stunned. It's fine, Guan Peng sneered. If you met them, you wouldn't be standing here right now. Xiao Hua didn't say anything. What about Ling Yunwu? Guan Peng asked again. Who is Ling Yunwu? Xiao Hua asked curiously, then sneered. Don't try to stall for time. This Xiao is the one asking you questions. Ling Yunwu naturally died at Golden Spring Mountain. Forget it. What does the Ling Feng Sword sect have to do with this old man? This old man doesn't need to care about their life or death. Tell me, what kind of deal do you want to make with this old man? Guan Peng sighed slightly and asked again. Xiao Hua smiled, looked at the small sword within the flames, and said, Actually, what this Xiao wants to do, does Senior not know? Do you still need this Xiao to say it? You want to save those hundreds of cultivators from Xuanyan school? Guan Peng said proudly. Clap, clap, Xiao Hua clapped and laughed. Talking to smart people is really easy. This Xiao hasn't even opened my mouth, yet Senior already knows. That's impossible. Guan Peng flatly refused. Those are hundreds of cultivators to this old man. It's a great merit. This old man definitely can't let it go. Ha ha, yes. To Senior, it's a great merit. But to this Xiao, isn't it also a great merit? Xiao Hua laughed loudly. This Xiao braved death to come here. Isn't it for this merit? If you have the heart, save those hundreds of cultivators from the hands of my sword cultivators. Your merit will be even greater. Guan Peng said disdainfully. Xiao Hua smiled with interest. How do you know this Xiao didn't save those 400 cultivators? Why do you think this Xiao won't fight? Oh, you actually really saved those 400 cultivators? Guan Peng was somewhat astonished. How could there be 400? Xiao Hua was angry. There are less than 200 cultivators left. Guan Peng was also angry. You only have 200 cultivators left. What about my swordsmen? How many did you kill? In a sword battle, you and I are enemies. What's the point of saying so much? Sigh, yes. Xiao Hua sighed. It's precisely because of this that this Xiao came to negotiate with you. Don't tell me you also capture my hundreds of swordsmen? Guan Peng was clearly somewhat astonished. Xiao Hua said honestly, this Xiao doesn't have any swordsmen. This Xiao only has you, the illusory swordsman. You don't seem to have completely controlled this old man, right? You have too much confidence in yourself. Guan Peng had an indescribable smile on his face, as if he didn't care about Xiao Hua's threat at all. TCH, Xiao Hua was very clear in his heart that Guan Peng had just forcefully activated his natal sword origin, causing his injuries to worsen again. If he hadn't forcefully supported himself in front of him and fought for leverage, he would have already collapsed. However, Xiao Hua didn't expose him and said with a smile, this matter isn't just based on words. If Senior doesn't want to make a deal with this Xiao, then just say it, we'll part ways. Of course, seeing Guan Peng's somewhat cold face, Xiao Hua clapped his hands and said, how can Senior's life be compared to those several hundred Xuanyan school disciples? Senior has taken down Xuanyan school's spirit stone mine. This kind of great merit. Since the start of the war, how many people have been able to achieve this kind of great merit? However, if the person who achieved this great merit silently passes away, wouldn't that be a pity? This merit would just be taken advantage of by others. This old man is fighting for sword domain. How can I care about these false merits and false reputation? Guan Peng replied with a stern expression. This old man would rather die together with you, and definitely won't make an unscrupulous deal with you. Sigh. Admirable. Admirable. Xiao Hua cupped his hands, his face extremely respectful, and said, I didn't think that there would be such a righteous person like Senior among sword cultivators. Guan Peng sneered. Pity. Xiao Hua turned his head and sneered again. Pity that Senior is dead. Who would still remember Senior? That Ling Yunwu, the swordsman that Senior mentioned just now. To be honest, they didn't die in this Xiao's hands, but they were trapped by the great array of Mount Quanjin and died in the end. But their deaths, who is responsible for it now? Isn't it this Zhao's head? Who would still think of the dead Ling Yunwu? When mentioning him, they would first mention this Xiao. Their deaths can only make this Zhao's name. What else can it do? Immediately after, Xiao Hua looked at Guan Peng's small sword and said with a sinister smile, naturally, Senior can also sacrifice his life for righteousness. Then, in the end, it will also make this Xiao. Another illusory swordsman's death is related to the terrifying phoenix. Why wouldn't this Xiao be happy? Actually, I won't hide it from Senior. This Xiao came this time to kill Senior, but seeing Senior, we could be considered to have hit it off, so I said a few more words. Guan Peng coldly looked at Xiao Hua. He wanted to urge the flying sword more than once, but that flying sword only had a trace of connection with him. It wanted to rush out of Xiao Hua's fire net several times, but it was all to no avail. He clearly knew that Xiao Hua's magic power was only so, If his sword origin wasn't damaged, Xiao Hua definitely wouldn't be his opponent. Unfortunately, this was only if, in this world, there was never anything lucky. Didn't Xiao Hua see through this point? So he stood here, facing an illusory swordsman, and spoke with assurance. Little friend Xiao, if you could remove the seal of those hundreds of cultivators, you wouldn't have come to find this old man, right? Guan Peng didn't miss the opportunity to remind him. That's right. Xiao Hua didn't hide anything. This is also one of the reasons why this Xiao came. At the same time, it's also because of this that Senior has the opportunity to enjoy this so-called blood crystal. As Xiao Hua spoke, he flicked his finger, and a thumb-sized fireball mysteriously appeared near Guan Peng. With a pung sound, it shattered the jade cup filled with blood crystal, and that fireball swallowed the spirit wine and the jade cup, turning everything into ashes in a moment. Samadhi true, fire? Guan Peng's eyes narrowed, seeming to be a little angry and a little surprised. Little friend, Xiao really has some skills. Are you trying to show off your power to this old man? Since you sword cultivators call me a terrifying phoenix, how can this Xiao let down sword cultivators' love? Xiao Hua smiled proudly. As for showing off my power, it's not that. This Xiao is just reminding Senior to not have any superfluous thoughts. All right, this Xiao will take his leave first. I will wait for Senior's decision. As he spoke, Xiao Hua waved his hand, and a magic power in his hand surged. That fire net, carrying Guan Peng's small sword, slowly flew to Xiao Hua's side. Xiao Hua's hand seemed to be holding 1,000 gene heavy object. Withdraw. Xiao Hua formed a hand seal, and that fire net gradually shrank. After it turned into a ball, it fell into Xiao Hua's sleeve. Then, Xiao Hua glanced at Guan Peng, slowly walked out of the cave, and disappeared. Calm to vote for it. Chapter 24:05. Seeing Xiao Hua leave, Guan Peng narrowed his eyes. It was unknown what he was thinking. He had a kind of intuition that Xiao Hua had used a secret technique from before to hide near the abode. If he wanted to escape or send a message to others, Xiao Hua would definitely appear without hesitation and kill him. Immediately, that kind of feeling of being bullied by dogs, which had always filled his heart, incomparably reached the lowest limit. A foundation establishment cultivator. Even if he concealed his cultivation, he's only a late-stage foundation establishment cultivator. He actually dares to threaten me in front of me. Guan Peng's heart was unsettled. Hundreds of thoughts came one after another. But in the end, they all turned into, even if he's a foundation establishment cultivator, but today, as long as he makes a move, my life will be gone. If my life is gone, what merit is there to talk about? It seemed that everything he thought of just now had become a pipe dream. Guan Peng's heart was extremely conflicted. Looking at a place in the abode where Xiao Hua seemed to be hiding, Guan Peng clenched his teeth and shouted. Not long after, a swordsman with a bright sword cultivation ran in. He bowed and asked, Marshal Uncle Guan, do you have any orders? Call Guan Qi over. Guan Peng's command made that sword cultivator baffled. Yes, this disciple understands. That sword cultivator didn't understand why Guan Peng didn't send a summoning talisman to call Guan Qi. He only bowed and left. In the time it took to brew a cup of tea, another sword cultivator who looked somewhat similar to Guan Peng quickly walked in. He looked around and bowed. Uncle Zhu, what orders do you have? Guan Qi, I just received a message from your Grandmaster phone. He has some ideas. Guan Peng pondered over his words. He wants to use the several hundred disciples of Shu and Yin school as bait to ambush some Dao sect cultivators. Or perhaps he would let these cultivators lead his disciples to attack some of the Dao sect's minds. I'm a bit hesitant right now and want to discuss it with you. Very good. Guan Qi only thought for a moment before nodding. Grandmaster Feng is an expert. He must have a certain degree of certainty for him to have such an idea. Moreover, he doesn't use my failing sword manners disciples, so why shouldn't we? But what if he fails and these disciples escape? Guan Peng asked. Don't worry, Guan Peng waved his hand and said, Most of these Taoist sect disciples are at the aura refining stage. There are only a few foundation establishment stage disciples. They are merely the coolies of Xuanyan school, so there's no point in keeping them. Besides, who knows how many cultivators we've killed in the Spirit Stone mine? These several hundred cultivators are nothing. And I understand. How about this? I'll leave this matter to you. Guanpeng nodded. I presume you already know some of the secret passages of the Spirit Stone veins. Yes, I do know. Guanqi smiled apologetically. Even if I don't know, I could just look for that Dao sect cultivator. Don't tell me they don't want to live. Good. Guanpeng asked again, what are you going to do? Guanqi was a bit puzzled as to why Guanpeng would ask such a detailed question today. However, he still replied respectfully, although I'll handle this matter, I still want all the swordsmen in the Spirit Stone mine to know. I plan to find a few close disciples and tell them the reason for this matter. Then, I'll lead those Dao sect cultivators into the secret passage. When they've all flown away, I'll pretend to notice, and not bad. Let's do that. Guanpeng waved his hand, indicating that he didn't need to say anything more. You have to make sure they can really escape. Don't let Feng Buping find fault with us. I understand. Uncle Zhu, please don't worry. Guanqi bowed and retreated. Little friend Xiao, did you hear that clearly? Guanpeng coldly said to the corner. Unfortunately, his voice echoed in the cave, but there was no movement. Guanpeng knew that it was impossible for Xiao Hua to let go at this moment. He could only force himself to get up, slap his hand, take out a medicinal pill, and put it in his mouth. Then, he once again weakly sat down. As expected, in less than half a meal's time, a faint clamor could be heard from outside the cave. A third-grade swordsman with a drawn sword hastily ran in, urgently reporting to Marshal Uncle Guan. For some unknown reason, the close to 400 Xuanyan school disciples imprisoned in the Spirit Stone mine have all suddenly escaped through the secret passageway. Oh, there's actually such a thing? Guanpeng slapped the table and stood up, saying angrily, what are you all doing? Why didn't you keep a close watch? Reporting to Marshal Uncle. That disciple's forehead was covered in sweat. Those 400 cultivators were all imprisoned by my sword cultivator's forbidden technique. Their cultivators are simply unable to break it. Moreover, a sword formation was placed at the entrance of the cave. Without Jindan cultivation, it's absolutely impossible to enter. So you all neglected your duties? Guanpeng said angrily. Marshal Uncle, please forgive me. That disciple immediately knelt down and said anxiously, presumably, that Jindan cultivator who escaped earlier came in through the secret passage again. Yes, it must be so. Guanpeng's eyes turned and said urgently, quick, inform all the disciples to be careful of that Jindan cultivator. This old man, cough cough, this old man will go take a look right now. As he spoke, Guanpeng struggled to get up and slowly flew up several feet before falling down again. He waved his hand and said, quickly go inform them. This old man will catch up soon. Yes, that disciple said with concern. Marshal Uncle, you can take your time. Those Dao sect disciples have already escaped quite far away with the Jindan cultivator. The disciples who are chasing after them might not be able to encounter them. Besides, this old man neglected that Jindan cultivator and that secret passage. Guanpeng sighed slightly and waved his hand to indicate that disciple to leave. How is it, little friend Xiao? Guanpeng asked softly in a probing manner. His figure stood at the entrance of the cave and did not return to his seat. Not bad. Xiao Hua's voice suddenly resounded throughout the cave. It was impossible to identify where he was. Since Senior keeps his word, this Xiao cannot be an untrustworthy person. As his voice fell, Guanpeng's small life sword actually flew in from outside the cave. Guanpeng did not dare to be negligent. He first smiled with his divine sense, then opened his mouth and the small sword entered it. Senior, we will meet again someday. Xiao Hua's voice once again resounded outside the cave. We will meet again someday? Humph. Guanpeng coldly snorted, then slowly walked out of the cave. He even felt tired of staying in this cave for a moment longer. Guanpeng thought that Xiaohua had already flown out of the spirit stone vein. After exiting the cave, he immediately formed a seal and entered the cave. He patted his hand and took out the jade talisman that Zhang Xiaojing gave him. After looking at it for a moment, the corner of his mouth slightly curled up, and he fled in a certain direction. After traveling for the time it took to eat a meal, Xiaohua arrived at a very secretive place. He saw that this was a cave densely covered with restrictions. Above the cave, there was a faintly flickering brilliance that overflowed with different runes. The runes contained an extremely strong magic power fluctuation, indicating that the restriction here was extremely powerful. Xiaohua extended his left hand and opened his Dharma eye. After looking for a moment, he once again fled into the cave's stone wall. When he reached the top of the cave, he discovered the weak point of the entire formation. Immediately after, Xiaohua took out the rabbit spirit talisman and struck it on the formation, easily entering the cave. He had already made sufficient preparations, but when he saw the neatly arranged spirit stones that were as dazzling as moonlight stones in the cave, he could not help but click his tongue in amazement. After no less than an hour, Xiaohua finally left the spirit stone vein. He concealed himself and flew into the air with a satisfied smile on his face. After flying for 100 miles, Xiaohua finally revealed himself. He frowned as he thought. According to what that sword cultivator disciple said, the only place nearby that can be called Yinyang is the Yinyang Twin Spring Mountain. There definitely isn't any other place. However, why did those illusory swordsmen bring Xiao Mao and the others to the Yinyang Twin Springs Mountain? Don't need to call Li Zongbao. But immediately after, Xiaohua shook his head. Forget it. Li Zongbao only barely has the strength of an early-stage gold core. He just killed a few bright swordsmen and consumed a lot of his true essence. How can he deal with the illusory swordsman? Or Mo La will lose his life. Besides, this young master will have to show his skills again. He claims to be #1 under gold core. If I let him see, wouldn't he be ashamed? It's better not to call him. Finished thinking, the sound of wind and thunder appeared around Xiaohua's body. He used thunder-controlling movement and flew towards the north where he saw the smoke rising from. Speaking of which, Xiaohua was worried about Xiao Mao, so he pushed his imperial lightning travel to its limits. His entire body was like a bolt of lightning as he streaked across the sky. The rumbling sound of thunder tore apart the few faint clouds above the snowy region. This thunder-controlling movement is fast, but it's too arrogant. Xiaohua tried his best to hide the sound of wind and thunder, but the faster he flew, the louder the sound of wind and thunder. If I reach the realm of Thunderclap, 9th heaven, I'm afraid that when this young master goes out, there will be thunder everywhere. Damn it, this young master can be awe-inspiring at that time, but now, it's better to keep a low profile. Thinking about the act he put on in front of Guanpeng, Xiaohua was secretly proud. It was not difficult for him to control Guanpeng, but it was difficult for him to make Guanpeng feel that he only had the strength to control Guanpeng. He definitely could not let Guanpeng feel that he could easily kill Guanpeng. Otherwise, the bird cultivator senior that Feng Buping's talisman would most likely notice Xiaohua through Guanpeng. Feng Buping already had the strength of nascent soul. What cultivation level could the senior he spoke of be at? Xiaohua used his heel to think and knew that he definitely could not deal with it. Even thunder-controlling sect probably could not deal with it either. He had better hide his tail. Thinking of Feng Buping, Xiaohua secretly pondered. This Feng Buping, what kind of bird cultivator is he? He actually knows wind controlling movement, and his cultivation is so powerful. And the most powerful thing is that he can tear apart space. I don't know if this secret technique was cultivated by him, or all the abilities of the spirit bird he possessed. This wind-controlling movement is very similar to Empress's wind-controlling movement. The spirit bird that this guy possessed couldn't be Empress, right? Or perhaps he has some sort of relationship with Her Highness? Chapter 2406. Of course, Xiaohua was just thinking about it. Even if Feng Buping was related to the Empress, he could not say anything about the Empress, nor could he not kill Feng Buping. Moreover, the Empress was an expert more powerful than a nascent soul cultivator. How could she be refined by Feng Buping? It's a pity that Feng Buping did not leave anything useful behind. What's the use of this shitty inner core bead? Xiaohua had already put the bead into the space, but Goldie, who always liked inner cores, opened its hazy eyes and just sniffed it with its nose and ignored it. Xiaohua intuitively felt that this bead was not a good thing. Maybe it can control the wind? Xiaohua waved his hand, and the fist-sized bead appeared in his hand. However, there was no change in the heaven and earth spiritual qi around Xiaohua. Even the faint blue light on the bead did not appear. Xiaohua hesitated for a moment. In the end, he did not dare to immerse his divine sense into the bead. He had a faint sense of vigilance in his heart. Feng Buping would not give up his physical body so easily. Moreover, there were too many strange things on Dawnrain Continent. If he was not prepared, he would not act rashly like he did in the past. After putting away the wind bead properly, Xiaohua took out Feng Buping's magic staff and weighed it in his hand. He smiled and said, "This thing is not bad. If I have time to integrate it into the magic staff, it can add a little weight." These two things were probably the result of Xiaohua and Feng Buping's life and death battle. If compared to Xiaohua's loss, it was really nothing. Xiaohua put away the magic staff and once again unwillingly sensed his primordial spirit and avatar. There was no reaction at all. Damn it, isn't this avatar unable to leave the body? It's already very good for me to be able to cultivate 200 feet away. What about now? I'm afraid it can't be calculated by miles, right? Suddenly, Xiaohua had another thought. He hurriedly sent his primordial spirit into the hand of Karma. That sliver of primordial spirit was like a fish swimming freely in the hand of the primordial spirit. There seemed to be some profound feelings that entered Xiaohua's mind, but it also seemed like those feelings were just like a spring dream without any trace. Forget it, forget it. Xiaohua was a little angry. He impatiently pulled his primordial spirit out. The left and right Dharmakayas were also obtained out of thin air. If I lose them, then so be it. Wait for me to get some true blood from somewhere else, then I'll just cultivate another one. Of course, this idea of Xiaohua's was just a random thought that came out of his vexation. But after this idea came out, it was like a seed that had fallen into a smelly ditch, growing uncontrollably. That's right, this young master's delusions aren't without reason. Since the disciples of the cultivation aristocratic families have the bloodline of the real bloodline and can produce Dharmakayas, why can't this young master fuse with the bloodline of the real bloodline and produce Dharmakayas? Besides, didn't bird cultivators and beast cultivators use themselves as cauldrons to transfer the true spirits of spirit beasts into their cauldrons for cultivation? Wasn't this the same principle as the cultivation of true blood in the cultivation families? Could it be that the bird cultivators, the beast cultivators, and the cultivation aristocratic families are somehow related? It's a pity that I don't have the secret cultivation method of the true blood of a cultivation family. I wonder if that bastard Cui Hongshan has it. Even if he has it, I'm afraid he won't show it to me. Xiaohua scratched his head. I reckon I'll have to think of another way. If I can refer to it, perhaps the cultivation method of the mighty Vajra Dharmakayas can also be used on the bloodline of the real bloodline? Or perhaps I can cultivate another Dharmakayas. When had the always stingy Xiaohua suffered such a big loss? It was inevitable that he would constantly grumble in his heart, wanting to find an opportunity to recoup this loss. However, Xiaohua didn't think about the number of top-grade spirit stones in his space. Even Xuanyin School would be heartbroken by that amount. Of course, Guanpeng wouldn't be heartbroken. That bastard simply wouldn't know that there were so many spirit stones. Time always passed quickly when one was calculating. 2 days later, Xiaohua's eyes were filled with a hazy fog. He saw endless fog rising from the ground and mountain ranges in the distance of hundreds or even thousands of li, rushing straight up into the sky. This fog was also different from normal. It floated up for thousands of zhang, but still didn't condense. It was still in that kind of gaseous state. If this area wasn't too big and the fog wasn't transparent, Xiao Hua would have really thought that he had arrived at Yulian Mountain. Such a large area, Xiao Hua's divine sense swept over and couldn't help but be a bit flabbergasted. Previously, when he followed Li Zongbao from afar, he only saw a small area. Moreover, that sword cultivator also said Yinyang Twin Spring Mountain. Twin Spring Mountain, as the name suggests, one mountain and one spring. How could Xiao Hua have thought that there were so many mountains and so many springs? How should I find it? Xiao Hua frowned. His figure slightly descended and rushed into the continuous fog. But inside the fog, there was another scene. Similar to the other places in the Gale Snowfield, this Twin Spring Mountain was also an ice lake. However, there was no thick layer of ice on top of the ice lake. Instead, it was a faint green color. However, within these green ripples, there were many fountains. Some were high and some were low, and they were spurting out. The high ones were more than 10 zhang, and the low ones were only a few feet. Are these all spurting out from the ground? Xiao Hua was very curious. He unconsciously flew to a fountain. This fountain was several zhang tall and had already left the surface of the lake. It immediately emitted a steaming mist that continuously soared into the sky. The water droplets that were like scattered flowers also flew towards the surface of the lake from several zhang above. Countless ripples appeared on the surface of the lake near the fountain. Accompanied by the sound of the water droplets falling on the surface, it was really like rain hitting a banana leaf. This water is extremely hot, Xiao Hua thought to himself as he stroked the fountain with his hand. Then he looked at the other fountain. That fountain was right beside this fountain, and it was only 3 meters tall. The water droplets that it sprayed out were obviously larger than the water droplets from this fountain. Moreover, there was no mist coming out of it. Instead, it was replaced by fine mist that looked like ice shards. The water droplets fell on the surface of the lake and seemed to have condensed. However, when they fell into the lake, they could no longer be found. Xiao Hua also touched it with his hand. He knew that this water was extremely cold. Yinyang Twin Spring Mountain. Xiao Hua flew up again and pondered. I'm afraid that these two springs are different. This is actually similar to the Yinyang Spring water in the Mo Zhao Black Forest. However, seeing that there's so many things, it is also normal. It can't be too rare. While Xiao Hua was flying, there were some faint flashes on the surface of the lake in the distance. Xiao Hua couldn't help but notice it. It's actually a rain lotus. The rain lotus was a kind of spiritual flower. It was born after the rain, and when the rain stopped, it was somewhat similar to the rainbow epiphyllum. It was not considered a precious spiritual object, but it was rare, so it appeared to be rare. Xiao Hua had only heard of it, but had never seen it before. He didn't expect that he would be able to see it today in the Huan country in the far west. Chapter 2407. In a misty rain 100 zhang away, the large rain lotus emerged from the sparkling lake. First, it was a round ball wrapped in green leaves. The surrounding fountains sprinkled droplets of water onto it. Each droplet of water was sparkling and translucent, slowly rolling. When Xiao Hua flew another 100 zhang, the green ball suddenly trembled slightly, like the trembling eyelashes of a beauty. Following the trembling of the ball, the green leaves slowly and shyly opened. It only opened a crack, and countless droplets of water fell, and the leaves actually closed again. Damn it, am I seeing things? Xiao Hua was flying in the air. He almost thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him. He almost rubbed his eyes. However, at this moment, the green leaf opened up again. A faintly discernible brilliance flashed out from the green leaf. It was like a halo that slowly spread out. It streaked across the blue water, streaked across the fountain, and streaked across Xiao Hua, who was flying over. Just as Xiao Hua was focusing on the brilliance, a fist-sized pink flower bud had unknowingly appeared from the green leaves of the rain lotus. The pink flower bud was densely covered with fine lines. Every line seemed to be trembling. and Xiao Hua's heart was somewhat intoxicated by it. Pah! With a soft sound, the flower bud opened up a slit in the middle, and an extremely light fragrance diffused out from the slit. This fragrance was admittedly light, but it was extremely fast. Xiao Hua's nose could already faintly smell it. When this fragrance entered his nose, Xiao Hua immediately felt his heart calm and his mind clear, and all the previous worries disappeared without a trace. The slit opened up extremely quickly. Xiao Hua only took a deep breath and was slightly intoxicated. The slit had already opened up, and 4 to 5 petals stretched out, revealing 3 to 4 stamens that were about the length of a finger. Leaving aside the fact that the petals were pink, the petals were mottled with spots that resembled raindrops. On top of the stamen, at the tip of the delicate stamen, there was a thumb-sized pink ball that was slightly swaying in the wind. In that instant, Xiao Hua actually saw a trace of beauty in that pink color. At this time, Xiao Hua had only flown a few dozen zhang and was still some distance away from the rain lotus. Wonderful! Xiao Hua took a deep breath and sighed inwardly. I, a cultivator, want to be the master of my life. Don't tell me I want to do something brilliant in my short lifespan and carve my name in the world. Based on my previous thoughts, isn't such a move a fight for fame and fortune? Looking at the rain lotus in the far north, it only had a short lifespan of a few breaths, but in the blink of an eye, the beauty of the rain lotus was so moving. Who would be able to see such a moving scene? If I didn't come here occasionally, I would definitely not have seen this treasure. Moreover, after this moment, this treasure will be destroyed again. Who knows when it will be opened again? But even if he were to open up again, it wouldn't be this time. Even a spirit flower can bloom with its own beauty. Even if we cultivators don't fight for fame and fortune, we still have to show off our elegance in the world, right? Yes, with my current cultivation, I have more than enough to protect myself in the battle of sword cultivators. However, just protecting myself alone won't be enough to show off my skills. Xiao Hua thought again. Moreover, after the Battle of Golden Spring Mountain, I, Cui Hongshen, and the rest have all performed meritorious deeds. If nothing unexpected happens, we will be sent back to the Imperial Thunder Sect. However, with just these meritorious deeds, it is still far from being worthy of Fairy Hongxia. If I want to enter the eyes of the Huanhua sect, I still have to perform more meritorious deeds. For example, killing Qingjian. Actually, although Xiao Hua thought so, he still had some hesitation in his heart. He was different from Li Zongbao. He didn't have any foundation. Moreover, it was obvious that he had a great enemy whose goal he didn't know. Now, he only wanted to raise his cultivation without anyone noticing him. Only then could he escape the fate of being someone else's chess piece. In fact, he wasn't even sure if anyone was paying attention to him. He only shrunk his neck like an ostrich, thinking that he didn't attract anyone's attention. However, there was one thing he was clear about. If he didn't perform meritorious deeds, others might notice him. However, as long as he performed meritorious deeds, he would definitely attract the attention of others. Condense the core. I must condense it, but I must not attract the attention of others. Xiao Hua was still hesitating. At this moment, he could only think like this. Moreover, even if I condense the core, I still have to build my foundation. Just as Xiao Hua thought of this, he was already less than 200 feet away from the rain lotus. At this moment, the stamen of the rain lotus had already begun to bend. The faint fragrance had already gradually disappeared. The pink petals that were like the skin of a delicate girl were showing signs of withering. Whoosh! At this moment, from extremely cold fountain, a small white snake suddenly emerged. It landed on the rain lotus, and a scarlet snake tongue flicked out. The delicate stem of the stamen broke upon contact, and the thumb-sized stamen fell. In a flash, it was swallowed into the white snake's mouth, following which, the white snake flicked its tail into the sparkling green pond water and disappeared. However, just as the white snake was swinging its tail, the snake's black eyes fiercely and coldly glanced at Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua was obviously caught off guard. However, Just as the white snake stretched out its head to swallow the rain lotus, he had already reacted. He waved his left hand and was about to use heaven and earth sleeve. However, seeing the white snake, Xiao Hua couldn't help but whisper, "Little White?" However, this white snake was obviously not Little White. Xiao Hua's hand also stopped. After all, the rain lotus was useless to Xiao Hua. However, it was extremely useful to the white snake. Moreover, the rain lotus was about to wither. Looking at the white snake's appearance, if Xiao Hua didn't fly over, it would have already eaten it. It was no wonder that the white snake glared at Xiao Hua. Did he want to delay his cultivation? However, the white snake's glare was quite vivid, causing Xiao Hua, who had just received benefits from the rain lotus, to twitch his mouth. Seeing the rain lotus slowly retracting back into the lake water, Xiao Hua's heart moved. He formed a water-dispelling seal and rushed into the lake water. He saw that under the lake water, a few feet away, there was a pink arm-like root. At this time, it had already begun to slowly sink into the lake water. Xiao Hua knew that this must be the root of the rain lotus. He didn't hesitate to stretch out his hand, wanting to put the root into his space. However, at this time, an ice-cold water arrow emerged from under Xiao Hua's body and directly pierced towards Xiao Hua's lower body. Xiao Hua scanned with his divine sense and knew that it was the white snake from before. "Can't you stab somewhere else?" Xiao Hua was angry. He waved his hand and released a confinement technique. Contrary to Xiao Hua's expectations, the white snake was actually a lot more flexible in the water than in the air. His confinement technique was actually dodged by the white snake. This white snake is a bit strange. However, immediately after, the white snake moved a few more times and continuously spat out ice thorns from its mouth. Each of them pierced towards Xiao Hua's lower body. Never-ending. Xiao Hua was angry. He stretched out his hand and slightly bent his 5 fingers. A powerful force was produced from his hand. A whirling current appeared in the lake water and rushed towards the white snake. The white snake saw that the situation wasn't good. It curled its tail and quickly rushed into a nearby, huge rock wall and disappeared. He was molested by a little white snake. Xiao Hua was a bit resentful. However, he still didn't have the thought of killing the little white snake. However, just as Xiao Hua put the root of the rain lotus into his space and was about to fly out of the lake water, a dozen little white snakes suddenly appeared from the uneven rock wall with many small holes. They all spat out ice thorns. Each of the ice thorns pierced towards Xiao Hua's lower body. Courting death, Xiao Hua was indeed angry. A little white snake molesting him was one thing, but you actually teamed up with a dozen little white snakes to molest him. Do you really think that I, your father, am a gigolo? Go! Xiao Hua waved his hand, and a dozen or so fireballs flew out and struck towards the dozen or so little white snakes. However, to Xiao Hua's surprise, the moment the scorching fireballs flew out of Xiao Hua's hand, they were immediately annihilated, and not a single spark was left behind. This lake water is really strange. I'm afraid it's because of the extreme cold and extreme heat. Xiao Hua didn't have time to think about it. He also waved his hand. A dozen thick ice thorns also appeared and shot towards the dozen little white snakes. However, contrary to Xiao Hua's expectations, the dozen ice thorns also melted and couldn't pierce through. Are you kidding me? Xiao Hua could only fly up and dodge the little white snake's ice thorns. Looks like the fire and water attributes are all useless. Xiao Hua thought for a moment. Then he opened his mouth and the Death Dream sword flew out. It shook slightly and turned into 16 flying swords, quickly stabbing towards the dozen little white snakes. Whoosh! The little white snake was obviously extremely sharp. When it saw the flying swords fly out, it immediately retreated back into the rock wall. Hee. After molesting this young master, you want to escape? You really know how to think. Xiao Hua sneered. He activated the water-dispelling technique and went to the rock wall. His body swayed and fell into the rock wall, using the earth escape technique. Seeing that Xiao Hua could actually escape into the rock wall, those white snakes that had some intelligence were dumbfounded. They were really as anxious as snakes that had lost their homes. They hurriedly fled. However, when Xiao Hua escaped into the rock wall, he was also stunned. The rock wall was riddled with holes, and there were many thin walls. It was simply several times more than the streets of Sky Patrol City. Once those little white snakes scuttled in, they immediately disappeared without a trace. It's that guy Xiao Hua's divine sense locked onto the little white snake from before. He activated the Earth Escape technique and chased after it. That little white snake was obviously very familiar with the paths inside the rock wall. Its escape was as smooth as mercury flowing down the ground. Moreover, it often slipped out a very strange fork in the road when Xiao Hua was not paying attention, causing Xiao Hua to be somewhat unprepared. After chasing for a while, Xiao Hua's anger had already subsided. It was more important for him to find Xiao Mao's traces. Why would he be angry with this little white snake for no reason? Immediately after, Xiao Hua smiled faintly, and his figure flew up. Chapter 24:08. But at this moment, a sound like a tiger pouncing and a dragon roaring came from in front of Xiao Hua. Although Xiao Hua was still inside the rock wall, the sound actually shook the rock wall, and the brilliance around Xiao Hua's body flickered a bit. Oh! Xiao Hua was shocked. He quickly scanned with his divine sense, and when he saw the situation several hundred feet away, his eyebrows relaxed, and his flying figure turned forward. When Xiao Hua came out of the rock wall, he was in the middle of a huge lake. This lake was very different from the previous one. There were only ripples in it, and very little water was gushing out. Only near the center of the lake, there was a fountain that was several hundred feet wide and several hundred feet tall. It was emitting hot steam, and it was continuously gushing out. This fountain had just appeared in the middle of the lake, and the huge sound was the sound of this fountain coming out. It seems there's nothing strange about it. Xiao Hua looked for a moment, and his divine sense and Buddhist sense spread out. Apart from a lot of steam rising, it was clearly much hotter than other places, but he didn't see anything strange. Just as he was about to fly away, more than 200 feet to the left of the fountain, another huge sound came, and it was also like a dragon roaring and a tiger roaring. But within the range of several hundred feet, countless bubbles fiercely boiled. Although the range was small, it was almost the same as the power of the Sunset Island rising from the sea. Another fountain gushed out from the surface of the lake. But this fountain wasn't as tall as the previous one, and it was only several dozen feet. Following the appearance of the fountain, another wave of biting cold wind rushed into the steaming hot air. However, the hot air was similar to what Xiao Hua had seen previously. It did not condense and continued to rush up into the sky. But when the cold wind blew past Xiao Hua's face and merged with the steam, Xiao Hua actually felt like a willow wind blowing on his face. Solitary doesn't give birth, solitary young doesn't grow. This extremely hot spring water will be accompanied by this extremely cold spring water. Xiao Hua only smiled slightly and was about to fly away again, but at this time, the extremely cold spring water gradually turned red. It's a bit strange. Xiao Hua's magic power dispersed, and he stared at the spring water again. The red water wasn't much, but it was enough to dye the entire spring water red. The red water droplets sprinkled down from the sky, making the misty lake look a bit strange. But then there's even more red water, and it was actually very thick, very close to dirty blood. Woo, a light sound came out, and several tattered Taoist robes sprayed out of the ice spring, and the rags fluttered like butterflies. Xiao Hua's pupils shrank. Following that, several mutilated corpses were also spat out. They were all broken arms and bones, and they were covered in sword scars. There was even a greenish-white color where the wounds were, as if they had just been cut off. The ice, the spring water, the green, and gradually the spring, the water, the lake, the ice of the lake, and gradually of the ice. He, of course, and of the Taoist, of the Taoist, of the ofs, was of. These corpses were wearing ordinary Taoist robes, and he couldn't tell which sect they were from. Moreover, the corpses were all badly damaged, and he couldn't tell whether they were male or female, or what age or cultivation they were. These corpses were sprayed out from the ice spring. Although they were unsealed, they must have been frozen underground. Who knows when these cultivators were killed? What was the reason for their deaths? Xiao Hua sighed inwardly. I don't know which sect they were from, and no one would know if they died here. Just as he was thinking, Xiao Hua's heart stirred. He turned his head and saw that 2 storage pouches had actually flown out of the ice spring. Xiao Hua didn't hesitate at all. He waved his hand, and the storage pouches that had been thrown high into the air landed in his hand. The storage pouches were in his hand, and the coldness on them was transmitted to Xiao Hua's hand. And, just as I expected, Xiao Hua smiled, and his divine sense entered the storage pouches. It's actually so cold? Seeing that the array in the storage pouches had already collapsed, and everything had disappeared, Xiao Hua couldn't help but be shocked by the coldness of the ice spring. Xiao Hua casually threw the storage pouch into the lake, and without any hope, he looked at the other storage pouch. Fortunately, although the formation of the storage bag had already collapsed, there was still a corner of the token that was exposed in the collapsed void. Xiao Hua hurriedly took out the token. Oh, this is the disciple of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Xiao Hua was shocked to find that this was actually a token used by the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciples. After he immersed his divine sense in it, he found that it was the token of a female cultivator from the Conversion Thunder Palace. A disciple of the Conversion Thunder Palace? Xiao Hua naturally thought of the beast cultivators he met before entering the Gale Snowfield. Xiao Hua didn't have time to clean up the corpses of the Conversion Thunder Palace's disciples who died under the claws of the beast cultivators, and the cultivators he met during this period weren't disciples of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Xiao Hua also didn't think of asking others to help him pass this information back to Sky Patrol City. Xiao Hua didn't hesitate to take out the command tokens that he'd put into his storage pouch. Sure enough, these command tokens were all the same. However, from the tokens, it couldn't be said that the owners of these 2 storage pouches came together with the Imperial Thunder Sect's disciple. However, since they weren't far away and they were all disciples of the Conversion Thunder Palace, then there was a possibility to save or not to save. Xiao Hua hesitated. He thought of the message from the Conversion Thunder Palace's disciple and knew that a gold core master of the Conversion Thunder Palace was in danger. But if I save this master, then Xiao Mao may not be able to save him. This was the reason for Xiao Hua's hesitation. At this time, Xiao Hua couldn't help but think of the Phoenix celestial body. Damn it, if I cultivate the Phoenix celestial body to the extreme, it should be able to become a real celestial body, or the external incarnation technique that the Empress mentioned. Then I won't have to hesitate like this. The 2 of us can go and save the 2 of us. To save this gold core master, I'm afraid it won't be easy. Xiao Hua immediately made a decision. For an intermediate gold core cultivator to be trapped, it must be extremely powerful. I'm afraid I won't be able to help much. Moreover, even if I save it, my background will be exposed, so it's better not to save it. Besides, Xiao Mao is closer to this gold core master than this gold core master. I have no reason not to save my family first. Xiao Hua waved his hand and kept the token into the space. Then his body flew up. However, he had only flown a few meters and had just arrived above the ice spring when the ice-cold aura caused Xiao Hua to suddenly be shocked. That's not right. I came here to look for Xiao Mao, but I was actually attracted by Yu He, and even I was teased by a dozen little white snakes in succession. I actually came here to chase the little white snakes. I also saw the ice spring spurt out, and the ice spring was filled with the corpses of the Conversion Thunder Sect's disciples. If it was another sect's disciple, I wouldn't say anything, but this Conversion Thunder Sect disciple is obviously related to the Gold Core Master from before, and I haven't sent any information about that master back to Sky Patrol City. Isn't this a series of karma? Could it be? I didn't come here to save Xiao Mao. Instead, I came here to save this master. Chapter 2409. If such obvious karma is placed in front of me, and I turn a blind eye to it, Then how can I improve my karma hand? Xiao Hua suddenly came to a realization, and he didn't hesitate any longer to form the water-dispelling seal and enter the rippling lake water. Xiao Hua always felt that the karma hand should be comprehended. However, apart from fusing that wisp of primordial spirit with the karma hand, he had no other method. At this moment, there was a kind of enlightenment in his heart. Perhaps discovering karma and unraveling karma was also a cultivation method. And it was often said that entering the world to gain experience was like this. This lake water was azure, and there were no excessive impurities in the water. Not to mention the white snake, even some seaweed and the like were extremely rare. He could see the bottom at a glance. Xiao Hua urged his magic power, and when he dived down several hundred feet, a powerful force was produced, preventing him from diving down. Xiao Hua understood that he didn't have the water escape technique, and this water-splitting seal was just a trick. Then he swept his divine sense and flew to the stone wall he came from before and continued to use the earth escape technique to dive down into the lake. Unfortunately, after the time it took to eat a meal, Xiao Hua's earth escape technique had reached its limit, and he couldn't go down anymore. However, looking at the lake water, he still hadn't reached the deepest part. Good, Xiao Hua was really surprised. This lake water is almost deeper than the Guei Sea, right? The ice and hot springs spurted out from such a deep place. How powerful is that? However, since I can't dive to the bottom of the lake, the Golden Core seniors of the converted Thunder Palace shouldn't have been able to dive so deep, right? Then, where did their corpses come from? Xiao Hua understood after thinking for a bit. There must be a passage under the lake. Then, Xiao Hua released his Buddhist sense again. However, his Buddhist sense couldn't go very far under this mountain range. An indescribable heavy pressure was suppressing his Buddhist sense from all directions, and he couldn't extend it far at all. His divine sense was even more impossible. It's really strange. Xiao Hua felt that there weren't any restrictions in this mountain range, and he was somewhat puzzled. Maybe it's the power of heaven and earth? After thinking for a moment, Xiao Hua cautiously opened his Dharma eyes. In his Dharma eyes, he saw that the mountain range was completely filled with a faint blue brilliance. This brilliance was somewhat similar to the spiritual energy of the water world, but it was also different. There was a faint murderous pressure. What the hell is this? Xiao Hua used his transcendence vision to observe for a long time, but he still couldn't figure out the situation. He could only close his transcendence vision and ponder again. It's very obvious that this place should be the periphery of this kind of thing. If we go further down, we might come into contact with the core. That core formation master is probably trapped inside. This young master hasn't even seen this thing before, so how can I possibly decipher it? The current Xiao Hua was no longer the previous hothead who dared to go anywhere. Even in the face of danger, he knew how to retreat. Forget it. Let's find out where the core formation masters are first. Xiao Hua's figure flew towards the other direction of the lake. It's just that Xiao Hua, who didn't have Buddhist knowledge to rely on, was like an ordinary person on a flat road. He could only take one step at a time, and it was very strenuous to find him. Let's get Little Silver to come out and help. With a wave of his hand, Xiao Hua took Little Silver out of the space. Chirp, chirp, there was still half a stalk of spirit grass in the corner of Little Silver's mouth as it looked around in bewilderment. When it saw Xiao Hua in the brilliant light of Earth Escape, realization dawned in its mouse eyes. It chirped, as if it was exasperated that Xiao Hua didn't live up to its expectations. It curled its little tail slightly and wrapped it around Xiao Hua's little finger. Shaking its head, it flew proudly in front of Xiao Hua. Looking at Little Silver's twitching little nose and the increasingly obvious gold strands on it, Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. Is there anything to be proud of? This is your innate magical ability. How can this old man compare with you? Innate magical ability? That's right. Xiao Hua suddenly sobered up. Damn it, that phone booping can tear the space apart. And see through this young master's cultivation base. All of these are his innate divine abilities. How could that guy be so generous as to let this young master see a jade slip containing a secret technique? It must be some kind of trick to lure the enemy. My goodness, it can tear open space. What kind of spirit bird is that? Xiaohua was envious again. Little Silver moved very quickly in front. Furthermore, it wasn't going down all the way and even seemed to be going up, so it was naturally easy for Xiaohua to follow. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Xiaohua's eyes lit up as a small spirit stone vein actually appeared in his field of vision. Little Silver stood proudly on the spirit stone vein, its little tail wagging slightly as it waited for Xiaohua's praise. Xiaohua didn't know whether to laugh or cry, but he could only get a thumbs up as if to praise it. Little Silver was also a little intelligent. It cheerfully scurried up Xiaohua's palm, its little tail curling around Xiaohua's thumb. Its two front paws cupped together and it arched slightly, as if it was showing humility. All right. Xiaohua waved his hand and put Little Silver back in his space, while he stood on the spirit stone vein and pondered. The spirit stone in front of him was a dark blue color, which was the best water-type spirit stone. This was also rare on Dawn Rain Continent. It wasn't easy for Little Silver to be able to distinguish it from a distance and bring Xiaohua here. If he let Little Silver lead the way again, there would definitely be more spirit stone veins ahead. As for the location of the Golden Core Masters, Little Silver might not be able to find them. Take it. What else is there to think about? Xiaohua said to himself, if you don't take the ready-made spirit stones, the heavens won't let you find them next time. Xiaohua then took out the ancient dragon silver and started to chisel. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, he had put a lot of spirit stones into the space. However, this was a spirit stone vein after all. Although it was very small, there were still a lot of them. But with Xiaohua alone, it would take a lot of time. That's right. How could this young master forget about these puppets? Xiaohua abruptly stopped and slapped his forehead. Previously at Quanjin Mountain, I was afraid that others would find out. Furthermore, the jade essence was too hard, so this young master had to do it himself. This is a spirit stone vein. Isn't this the time for the puppets to do their work? Then, Xiaohua waved his hand, and numerous puppets were taken out and started to work. Xiaohua clapped his hands and fled in the direction of the spirit stone vein. After fleeing for a while, he saw many caves and tunnels appear before his eyes. He immediately understood that there was a spirit stone vein at the bottom of Yin Yang Twin Springs Mountain, and what he had found was only a corner of it. However, after he carefully followed the tunnel and searched for a while, he didn't find any traces of swordsmen or cultivators. There were only a few scattered spirit stones and a few damaged low-grade flying swords that were thrown into the cave. Xiaohua came to a realization. This is the same as Mount Quanjin, an abandoned spirit stone mine. Furthermore, it's a sword cultivator's spirit stone vein. In that case, the Golden Core Masters of my Imperial Thunder sect discovered this spirit stone vein and found the tunnel to enter the vein. But after they entered, they fell into it? Xiaohua scratched his chin and came up with some plausible conclusions. A place that Golden Core Master could find must have spirit stones, right? Otherwise, why would she go there? Thinking this, Xiaohua could only pull Little Silver out of the space again. Looking at Little Silver again, he was really angry. Hadn't he just sent him back? Why was he being pulled out again in such a short time? And he still wanted him to rest? Little Silver chirped, looking completely indifferent. Xiaohua smiled evilly and stretched out his thumb, wiggling it up and down as if he was nodding. Seeing this, Little Silver's eyes flashed with a novel expression, and he immediately pounced over. His little tail wrapped around Xiaohua's thumb, his body wiggling up and down as Xiaohua nodded. Chirp, 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 chirp. Little Silver was happy, and without waiting for Xiaohua to give him any instructions, he darted out of Xiaohua's hand again. He didn't follow the tunnel at all, and directly escaped into the rock wall. Seeing that Little Silver didn't hesitate at all, Xiaohua was amused. Needless to say, if it wasn't spirit stones in front of them, then it wasn't anything good. Little Silver's nose was worthy of a spirit-seeking mouse's nose. However, after entering the rock wall, Little Silver was a little hesitant. His nose twitched all over the place, not up and down, and the path he escaped in was also crooked. After a meal, Little Silver suddenly scuttled down in a straight line. Great! Xiaohua was overjoyed. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, Little Silver came to an abrupt stop. His little head turned left and right, and with a whoosh, he jumped out of the rock wall. Xiaohua followed, and in front of them was actually a pitch-black tunnel. In the darkness, Little Silver's two mouse eyes were abnormally bright. It wasn't until Xiaohua took out the Minghua stone that he could clearly see that this was a 1 zhong wide and narrow tunnel. The tunnel was unusually clean, and there were no broken stones or anything like that. Furthermore, there were faint drops of water dripping down the walls of the tunnel, which condensed into water under Xiaohua's feet and flowed quietly down the tunnel into the depths. What's wrong? Xiaohua looked at Little Silver, who was still in midair, and wondered why it wasn't moving forward. Who would have thought that Little Silver would actually squeak twice, then turn over and lie down in midair with its belly facing up? Its four little paws were curled up slightly, and only its little tail was stretched out as straight as a pencil. What are you doing? Xiaohua was quite puzzled, but after a while, Little Silver still didn't move, as if it had lost all signs of life. Xiaohua instantly understood. It turned out that Little Silver was saying that it was too dangerous up ahead, and it didn't dare go forward. Or Little Silver was reminding him that there was a life-threatening danger up ahead. Hee, I got it. Get up. As soon as Xiaohua's voice fell, Little Silver stood up with a whoosh. Damn it. When did you understand my voice? Xiaohua asked very strangely. Who would have thought that Little Silver would actually squeak again, and it really was answering Xiaohua's question. Forget it. Take me to the place just now. Xiaohua didn't care what Little Silver was saying as he instructed. Squeak, squeak. Little Silver wagged its tail and easily drilled into the rock wall. Forget it. It's better than nothing. Xiaohua always felt that holding something in his hand was the only way to feel at ease. The tunnel was actually very long. Xiaohua didn't dare to fly too fast. He only used ordinary flying techniques to move forward. He saw more than 10 Imperial Thunder Sect symbols, but the tunnel still didn't have an end. What are sword cultivators doing? Why did they dig such a long tunnel for no reason at all? Why didn't they do a job with a bright future like mining? What are they doing here? Xiaohua was really somewhat baffled. Spiritual sense couldn't be used here, so sword cultivators naturally didn't know what was in front of them. Why did they dig such a long tunnel in the spirit stone vein? However, the pitch-black darkness was still the same, but the sound of flowing water was getting louder and louder. From the gurgling sound of a stream to the rumbling sound of a flood, there was actually a feeling of 100 rivers returning to the sea. Another 2 hours passed. Xiaohua didn't know how deep he had flown down the tunnel, but suddenly he felt a kind of enormous suction force in front of him that wanted to suck him in. Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. He hastily urged his magic power, and his whole body flashed with brilliance, holding his body back. Then, he looked up again. The edge of the bright flower stone's brilliance was already misty, and the uneven surface of the tunnel could no longer be seen. This is the end of the tunnel. Xiaohua understood. Moreover, this end is still connected to another place. Xiaohua slightly turned his eyes. In a very conspicuous place on his left hand, there was another symbol of the Imperial Thunder Sect. Then, Xiaohua slowly flew to the edge of the tunnel, but he saw that the end of the tunnel was a huge abyss. In the abyss, there was a huge gale blowing down from the top. That enormous suction force was caused by the gale. Xiaohua stuck his head out to look at that pitch-black, bottomless abyss. On the four walls of the abyss, there were countless small streams of water flowing out from the cracks or from the tunnel. They poured onto the protruding rock walls and rolled towards the bottom of the abyss. The sound of the streams converging resounded throughout the entire abyss. Xiaohua threw his hand, and the bright flower stone drew an arc in the air, flashing brilliance, and fell into the abyss. Seeing that brilliance disappear like a meteor, Xiaohua frowned. This abyss seems to be very deep. The Golden Core, stage master of the Imperial Thunder sect, is trapped below? Hey, are you okay? Xiao Hua shouted at the top of his voice, but his voice was pulled down, and there was no echo. The gale in the abyss whistled down, and it was very strong. It tore apart the streams of water, and also tore apart Xiao Hua's thoughts. Just this gale alone wasn't difficult for Xiao Hua, but the key was that he couldn't use his divine sense, making Xiao Hua feel uncertain about the bottom of the abyss. Forget it, since I'm here, and the Golden Core Stage Master can go down, this Xiao can naturally also go down. Xiao Hua urged his magic power, and the protective brilliance around his body flickered. It was no different from the protective brilliance of a Golden Core Stage cultivator, and he jumped down. Sigh, how good would it be if I had a Phoenix Dharma body? Xiao Hua's figure was swept down by the gale, and he thought of the Dharma body's wings again. When he stabilized his figure, he leaned against the side of the abyss's rock wall. Then he urged his magic power and slowly descended. Xiao Hua was abnormally careful, but after descending for more than several hundred zhang, he didn't see anything strange. Everything was extremely normal. The more peaceful it was, the more Xiao Hua's heart was apprehensive, and he clenched the sun leaf fan in his hand tightly. The wind blowing from above the abyss is increasingly stronger, and it's also a lot heavier. It's slowly going to exceed the limit of the defense. As Xiao Hua fell into the abyss, he gradually discovered the abnormality. Moreover, the bottom of this abyss is even colder, and it's gradually approaching the extreme cold of the ice spring. Let's go down a bit more. If it exceeds the limit of the defense, I'm afraid I'll have to think of another way. Xiao Hua didn't have any defensive magic treasures, and he was indeed somewhat stretched, so he thought to himself. Immediately after, he fell for more than several hundred zhang. Xiao Hua felt the pressure around his body increase, and the protective brilliance around his body flickered. Just as he was about to urge his magic power again, suddenly, several dozen large tunnels appeared beside Xiao Hua, and from those tunnels, a strong hurricane blew out. These hurricanes combined with the gale from above the abyss to form a powerful force. Moreover, this unforeseen event was especially sudden, and Xiao Hua was caught off guard, and his entire body lost its balance. With a loud, he rushed down the abyss along with the hurricane. Misfortune never comes alone, and Xiao Hua rapidly fell for several hundred zhang. The pressure within the hurricane and the abyss suddenly increased, and the protective golden light could no longer hold on, and was quickly annihilated. Oh no! Xiao Hua hurriedly urged his magic power again, and his body flickered with brilliance again with great difficulty. Xiao Hua's strength was comparable to a late-stage gold core, but after all, he didn't have a gold core in his body, and most of the divine abilities of gold core cultivators were unable to be used. Of course, it was fortunate that his magic power was deep, and once the protective brilliance was annihilated, he urged it again, and he was still able to stabilize his body with great difficulty. Just when Xiao Hua felt that his body was stable, another hurricane appeared around the rock wall and joined the gale. This time, Xiao Hua was truly unable to stabilize his body, and he did his best to urge his magic power to protect himself. Like a windmill, he spun rapidly and rushed to the bottom of the abyss. Can gold core cultivators still have other methods? Xiao Hua's brain was spinning rapidly like his body. How did they enter this abyss? But at this moment, with a loud pop, water splashed everywhere, and Xiao Hua fell solidly on the abnormally firm rock wall. And the defense that Xiao Hua had just urged his magic power to was instantly destroyed. Damn it, this young master understands. Xiao Hua's body was finally considered to have been tempered countless times, and now it was abnormally firm. Although his entire body was faintly sore, he could still clap his hands and force himself to stand up. This was a huge protrusion that extended from the rock wall, forming a so-called platform. It covered a small half of the abyss, and Xiao Hua fell on it. Presumably, a gold core master also fell here, or else how could this abyss be the end? Xiao Hua stood up, and his body was still resisting the howling gale. However, since there was a platform blocking the gale, the pressure on his body was greatly reduced. Xiao Hua walked around the platform, but didn't see a place that could lead him to the depths of the rock wall. Unconsciously, he came to the edge of the platform and saw that on the opposite side of the platform, there was a faint brilliance. Although it was blurry, he could still see it clearly. Xiao Hua stretched out his arm, and just as he touched the hurricane, with a pong sound, Xiao Hua's arm was immediately sucked back by the hurricane. There's nothing on the platform, then I can only fly to the brilliance on the opposite side. Even if there's an entrance under this platform, I can still see it clearly when I reach the opposite side. This was why Xiao Hua didn't use the lightning escape technique, and instead used the wind escape technique. Sure enough, his body became much more stable in the hurricane. Although the heavy pressure still couldn't be eliminated, it was enough for Xiao Hua to easily fly from the platform to the place where the brilliance came from. Contrary to Xiao Hua's expectations, there was actually a 10-zhong-long fissure on the opposite cliff. It split the entire cliff in half, and the brilliance was emitted from that fissure. However, the brilliance was still in the depths of the crack, and Xiao Hua still couldn't see it clearly. Moreover, when Xiao Hua's body fell into the crack, he discovered that there was no gale blowing in the crack, no matter if it was blowing in or out. Chapter 24:11. Phew! Xiao Hua waved his hand, and the sun leaf fan that he had been holding in his hand flashed with brilliance. A thick fire dragon was born, and it flew towards Xiao Hua several meters in front of him. This was Xiao Hua's casual test, but what made Xiao Hua even more shocked was that the fire dragon only flew a few feet before it immediately dimmed and was annihilated. This place is actually filled with water-type spiritual energy. Xiao Hua hurriedly opened his Dharma eye. Sure enough, the light blue spiritual energy became increasingly dense. It should be this kind of water-type spiritual energy that extinguished the fire dragon of the Yang Leaf Fan. Seeing that the Yang Leaf Fan was useless, Xiao Hua waved his hand and ignited the Samadhi True Fire. Looking at the pure Samadhi True Fire in his palm, Xiao Hua had mixed feelings. Although the Samadhi True Fire was not extinguished, it was still terrifyingly weak. It swayed and flickered as if it could be blown out by the wind. This was the first time Xiao Hua encountered such a situation. It's really a bit strange. The yin-yang twin spring mountain has yin and must also have yang. Even if the water-type spiritual energy is abundant, the fire-type spiritual energy should not be lacking. Xiao Hua pondered and put away the Yang Leaf Fan. The Samadhi True Fire was also extinguished. He raised his hand and took out the wishful staff. At the crucial moment, a magic tool, not of the 5 elements, is still useful. Xiao Hua waved the staff in his hand. His courage came, but he still did not dare to fly. Instead, he slowly walked towards the crack. The crack was very wide and seemed to cross the entire rock wall. However, Xiao Hua knew that the key was still in front. It was a blurry place with only a faint flash of brilliance, and the surroundings of the brilliance were still pitch black. Something's wrong. Suddenly, Xiao Hua stopped. Previously, when Xiao Hua walked in the tunnel, there were all kinds of sounds like flowing water and whistling wind. But here, there was actually no sound. Only the sound of Xiao Hua's footsteps and even the sound of his robe could be heard. All of a sudden, Xiao Hua's hair stood on end. Xiao Hua stopped. His eyes turned rapidly, and he even opened his Dharma eyes. Fortunately, other than the pitch-black darkness that he could see with his naked eyes, there was only the light blue that he could see in the court. There were no shadows of the ghosts in the Tianmen Mountain. Xiao Hua thought himself clever and imitated a bird's cry. The sound did not have an echo like in the open mountain, and it did not even seem to travel far. Is it the effect of the water-type heaven and earth spiritual energy again? Xiao Hua scratched his head, somewhat enlightened. Soon after, he used the immortal body bestowment technique, and the water-type heaven and earth spiritual energy was actually absorbed into his body with great difficulty. When he refined it, his true essence actually had a slightly heavy feeling. However, The amount of true essence that could be refined by the spiritual qi was much more than usual. This is a good place to cultivate. Xiao Hua sighed, but his footsteps didn't stop. In the time it took to eat a meal, Xiao Hua could clearly see that there was a huge rock pillar in front of him. The emerald green brilliance was coming from the protrusions of the rock pillar. Oh, why don't I see anything strange about it? Looking at the huge rock pillar in the distance, Xiao Hua was still worried about traps, but seeing that there wasn't any blood or corpses around, he turned his attention to the rock pillar. The rock pillar was probably several thousand zhang wide, blocking the front. Xiao Hua's field of vision was also blocked by the 10 zhang crack. However, Xiao Hua could already see that the crack had disappeared near the rock pillar. The rock pillar was inside a huge space. Shua! Suddenly, an intense green brilliance flashed from the 200 zhang tall rock pillar, attracting Xiao Hua's attention. However, when Xiao Hua raised his eyes to look at the green brilliance, the sword light around him suddenly flashed, like the reflection of sunlight on a mirror, dazzling Xiao Hua's eyes. Not good, Xiao Hua secretly shouted in his heart. Seeing that there were 4 flying swords around him, he hastily flew back. However, it was already too late. The scene around Xiao Hua was completely distorted, and the rock pillar, the crack, and the light all disappeared. The 4 flying swords vibrated, and countless sword lights surrounded Xiao Hua. In the blink of an eye, Xiao Hua was completely surrounded by the sword lights. Following the appearance of the 4 flying swords, the rock wall around Xiao Hua completely disappeared, revealing a huge space. In that space, there was an incomparably huge rock pillar standing in the center. It turned out that the sword formation formed by the 4 flying swords relied on the combination of the crack and the rock pillar. When one's attention was focused on a rock pillar, they would involuntarily fall into the sword formation. Even though Xiao Hua was already extremely careful, he still fell into the sword cultivator's trap and was not happy at all. Looking at the sword formation again, there were several corpses within the falling sword lights. Although these corpses were covered in sword wounds, and some of them even had their hearts and lungs pierced, these corpses were perfectly preserved and lifelike. One of them was a female cultivator with grizzled hair and an appearance of a middle-aged woman. Xiao Hua only felt his vision blur, and countless sword lights pierced towards him from all directions. Everything in front of him disappeared, and the entire world was only filled with sword lights. High up in the sky, the sword lights were like a riot of falling flowers, each of them painful, each of them dazzling. In his left hand, the sword lights were like raindrops hitting banana leaves, each drop killing gods, each drop suffocating. In his right hand, the sword lights were like autumn leaves drifting, each of them melancholy, each of them sorrowful. Even under his own feet, there were countless whistling sword lights, like gushing flames of anger, piercing straight out. Xiao Hua did not hesitate, and the wishful staff in his hand danced. The sky-piercing staff technique was really amazing, and it was really watertight. With a burst of crackling sounds, all the sword lights were shattered, and the spiritual power in Xiao Hua's body was urged to fly in one direction. However, Xiao Hua's spiritual power was not urged, and once it was urged, a powerful force of imprisonment immediately pressed down from all directions. It simply did not allow Xiao Hua to struggle, and all of a sudden, it penetrated his body and imprisoned Xiao Hua's true essence. Damn it! What kind of bullshit sword formation is this? Xiao Hua was shocked because this force of imprisonment was really fierce. With the strength of late gold core stage, Xiao Hua could not struggle. Needless to say, according to Xiao Hua's estimation, even if Taoist Jingru and other nascent soul stage cultivators came, they would not be able to resist. Fortunately, Xiao Hua's strength was not imprisoned by the formation. Waving the wishful staff, Xiao Hua was still able to easily knock down all the flying swords. Since he could not fly, Xiao Hua could not stop his feet. While waving the wishful staff, he retreated. He would rather fall into the abyss than be trapped in this sword formation. However, Xiao Hua's calculations had long fallen into the calculations of the sword cultivator. Xiao Hua walked for a while, but his figure did not leave the place for half a minute. Chapter 24:12. In the time it took to eat a meal, Xiao Hua's staff shadows surged, tightly protecting his entire body. However, the sword lights seemed to be endless, swarming down like a swarm. They were simply like snowflakes fluttering in the sky. Moreover, with Xiao Hua's resistance, the power of the sword light became stronger and stronger. Xiao Hua's staff also gradually became heavier. Needless to say, if Xiao Hua did not have any special means and only passively defended, even if his divine power was amazing, sooner or later he would be crushed by the increased power and be like the scattered corpses on the ground, pierced by thousands of swords. Xiao Hua, who was in the middle of the situation, was naturally anxious. He was clear about the danger. Go! Xiao Hua took the time to wave his hand and urged the dragon transformation art. He forcibly urged a trace of spiritual power and took out the Tongue Jiao shears. The Tongue Jiao shears flew out and cut toward the distance. Unfortunately, the golden light of the Tongue Jiao shears cut through a large area of sword light. However, if it wanted to hit the flying swords and break the sword formation, it was still impossible. Just when Xiao Hua was free to urge the dragon transformation art, the Tong Tian staff technique had a flaw. Two sword light passed through the gap between the staff shadows and stabbed towards Xiao Hua's neck. Grandma, isn't this sword formation too powerful? Xiao Hua was shocked. He knew that his skin was rough and his flesh was thick, but he did not dare to be intimate with the sword light. In a hurry, he threw out the Tongue Jiao shears with his left hand and punched the sword light. Xiao Hua's big Dipper God fist was still powerful. It hit the back of the sword light. After a pung sound, it was followed by a kacha sound. The sword light actually broke like a real flying sword. As for the other sword light, Xiao Hua used the ethereal steps and easily dodged it. After dodging the two sword lights, he saw that the Tongue Jiao shears was like a clay ox entering the sea. Xiao Hua waved his hand, and the Tongue Jiao shears returned to the space. There was no longer a trace of spiritual power in his body. Xiao Hua bit his lip. His brain was spinning rapidly, but what could he do without spiritual power? After thinking for a moment, he waved the wishful steel staff in his right hand and tried to protect his body. With some effort, he opened the Dharma eye in his left hand to see if there were any flaws in the sword array. In his Dharma eye, 4 resplendent sword lights were suspended at the 4 corners of the sword formation. 4 different colored lights flew out from the sword lights and circled around the sword formation. They intertwined with each other and formed a mysterious trajectory as they flew toward Xiao Hua. The 4 different colored lights then formed different colored lights, which looked very dazzling. There's someone else in the sword array. Just as Xiao Hua was examining the flaws in the sword formation, he suddenly saw a ball of blue light flickering under the blue brilliance of the sword light. However, the brilliance was extremely faint. If Xiao Hua hadn't carefully examined it, it would have already passed by. Could it be a gold core stage master of my Imperial Thunder Sect? Xiao Hua woke up, so he waved the wishful steel staff while walking towards the blue brilliance. It was strange to say that no matter how Xiao Hua flew just now, he could only wander in the same place. Even if he walked, he could not leave half a step. He stared in one direction with his Dharma eye. Although he felt that his body was walking randomly in the sword array, he was getting closer and closer to the blue brilliance. When the blue brilliance was near, Xiao Hua could clearly see that it was a fist-sized bead. It emitted a thin brilliance that covered an old woman with gray hair. The old woman's body was full of blood. Her shoulders, chest, and abdomen had deep cracks on her robe. Moreover, on top of this blue brilliance, the same sword light that attacked Xiao Hua fell. Every time a sword light fell, the blue brilliance trembled and the brilliance dimmed a little. Looking at the brilliance, he was afraid that it would not last long. Senior, Xiao Hua shouted anxiously. Oh, you. Although the inside of the sword formation was abnormally dangerous, it was extremely quiet. Numerous sword lights were emitting faint sounds. Xiao Hua's voice immediately reached the cultivator's ears. The female cultivator forced herself to open her eyes. Her eyes were abnormally dim, and she looked like she was on the verge of death. However, when she saw Xiao Hua's robe, her eyes unconsciously flashed with a strange light. She anxiously said, "You are a disciple of my Imperial Thunder sect?" "Yes, this junior is a disciple of Thunder Palace who participated in the Sword Cultivator War. My name is Xiao Hua." Xiao Hua replied, while waving the wishful steel staff. "Senior, are you Martial Uncle Dui Miaoqing?" "Yes, this old woman is." Dui Miaoqing's eyes became more spirited. She squeezed out a smile on her face. "Could it be that you are the disciple sent by Palace Master Dui?" "This." Xiao Hua hesitated slightly and shook his head. "Senior Dui, please know that the disciple you sent to send the message has died in the hands of the Huan country's beast cultivators. This junior was just passing by. However, I only killed those beast cultivators. All the senior brothers were killed." Sigh, Dui Miaoqing immediately understood. "You still haven't sent the communication talisman back to the Imperial Thunder sect?" "Yes." This disciple was in a hurry. "The corpses of the senior brothers and sisters were all in the storage pouch. I didn't have time to organize them, so the communication talisman was naturally not sent out." Xiao Hua's face revealed an apologetic expression. "And you're extremely good." Dui Miaoqing's face revealed a smile. This old woman was still thinking that my corpse would be left behind in the foreign territory. Now that I have met Martial Nephew, I have someone to rely on. After this old woman dies, I ask Martial Nephew to bring this old woman's corpse back to Imperial Thunder Palace. Martial Uncle, please don't say such disheartening words. This disciple still has to rely on Martial Uncle's divine ability to break the array," Xiao Hua said anxiously. Dui Miaoqing looked at the injuries all over her body, then looked at the thin brilliance. She shook her head and said, "This old woman's injuries are very serious. Even pills can't heal them. The time has been delayed for too long. If not for my persistence, I would have died long ago. The magic power of this misty tide bead is also about to be exhausted. In a few more moments, this old woman will be killed by the sword." Xiao Hua quickly walked in front of Dui Miaoqing and silently chanted the word "grow" in his heart. The wishful staff grew to about 3 feet. It danced in front of Dui Miaoqing to protect her, helping to block the sword light that fell in front of her. "Xiao Hua, this magic staff of yours is actually a strange object," Dui Miaoqing said in a low voice. "This old woman fell into the sword array. Even after using many magic treasures, I still couldn't block it. In the end, I had to use the Misty Tide bead to barely block it. However, if I only rely on this magic staff to block the sword light, I won't be able to break the sword array. I'm afraid that in the end, I won't be able to escape." Xiao Hua smiled bitterly and replied, "Junior knows. Junior is preparing to go under the flying sword that's setting up the formation and see if I can knock it down." "Oh, you can see the flying sword array?" Dui Miaoqing was a bit shocked. "This great array is really to restrict cultivators like me. All of my divine sense and magic power can't be used. I'm afraid that cultivators won't be able to break the array unless they have a sword array or other means. And this junior has a secret technique that can see the flying sword array," Xiao Hua said without hesitation. "Senior, please wait a moment. This junior will be back soon." And Dui Miaoqing nodded slightly, a trace of hope appearing on her face. But at this moment, a sharp sword light streaked across the sword array, piercing through Dui Miaoqing's body defense and stabbing in her chest. "See, Dui," Miaoqing felt pain and said anxiously, "Why did this sword light suddenly become sharp?" Xiao Hua suddenly realized that it was because of his arrival that the sword array's power increased, right? But without waiting for him to speak, Dui Miaoqing hurriedly said, "Xiao Hua, I'm afraid this old woman won't live for long. This time, I came to the Gale Snowfield to investigate the cause of death of my Dui Hui from DUI Lay Palace. This old woman found DUI Huey's message not far from the Gale snowfield. It seemed that she was aware of some secret of sword cultivators, so she took the risk to come here. As soon as this old woman entered the tunnel of the mineral vein, I felt that something was amiss, so I first sent my disciples back to send a message. This old woman entered alone, but this old woman still fell into the sword cultivator's trap. You must break out of this sword array and send this news back to the Imperial Thunder Sect or the Sky Patrol City. Tell them that this place is related to the outcome of the battle between sword cultivators and that they must come here to investigate carefully. In addition, Xiaohua, your cultivation base is enough. Don't go any further. Ahead will definitely involve the great secret of sword cultivators, and a sword array will definitely be more powerful. Remember. At this point, DUI Miaoqing's face flushed red. It was obviously the final radiance of the setting sun. She pointed her finger at the tide bead above her head and smiled bitterly. This old woman is considered an anomaly in the Imperial Thunder Sect. I actually have a water attribute physique. If it weren't for the surname DUI, I would have been expelled from the sect long ago. Therefore, this old woman's magic weapons and cultivation methods are not passed down in the sect. Send this old woman's body back to the sect, and these cultivation methods and magic weapons and other things will be left to you. You can also find a fated person on the Xiaoyu continent to give them to. After speaking, DUI Miaoqing's face actually showed a trace of a smile, as if a heavy burden had been lifted off her shoulders. The tide bead above her head suddenly converged and fell on her chest. Senior, when he heard DUI Miaoqing say that she had a rare water attribute physique in the Imperial Thunder Sect, Xiaohua was slightly stunned. When he saw the smile on her face, Xiaohua's heart became miserable again. The Imperial Thunder Sect was full of thunder and fire attributes. A water attribute woman actually cultivated to the middle stage of Gold Core. The hardships she faced were obvious. Moreover, going to Huan country to investigate the cause of DUI Huey's death was such a difficult and dangerous task, yet they sent a female cultivator instead of a male cultivator. This was probably a burden for DUI Miaoqing. At this time, she gave the heavy responsibility to Xiaohua. It was a kind of relief. Others might not understand DUI Miaoqing's difficulties, but Xiaohua felt the same way and felt endless sympathy in his heart. He had only just entered the Foundation establishment realm, yet he was being scolded like this. And this was because DUI Miaoqing didn't know that he had already converted to an Earth attribute physique. If she knew, who knew what would happen? However, it was useless for Xiaohua to call out again. The tide bead was DUI Miaoqing's life source magic weapon. DUI Miaoqing's life force was already gone, so the tide bead lost its connection with her primordial spirit and fell from the sky. AI, she's also a pitiful person. Even though Xiaohua didn't know how difficult DUI Miaoqing's life as a gold core cultivator was, just based on the fact that all her inheritance was given to Xiaohua after her death, his heart was filled with sorrow. Chapter 24:13. DUI Miaoqing had fallen, but her corpse could be easily sent into the space. Xiaohua even received the tide bead, and then he waved the wishful steel staff and walked towards the closest flying sword. But when he reached the flying sword, Xiaohua was dumbfounded again. The flying sword was hanging high above. Even if he stretched the wishful steel staff to its maximum length, he still couldn't reach it. Now that he couldn't fly, how could he do it? Xiaohua thought a little and used the ethereal steps. The light body technique was now in effect. Although it was not high, it could still be barely reached in his eyes. Just as Xiaohua waved the wishful steel staff and took out the magic wand to hit the flying sword suddenly jumped up and then shook. A flying sword fell from the flying sword and stabbed straight at Xiaohua's forehead. Grandma, this trick also won't work. Xiaohua cursed and casually hit the flying sword with the wishful steel staff. With a dang sound, the flying sword was not broken. It only shook slightly and broke into Xiaohua's body. Not good. Xiao Hua's heart jumped. His right hand didn't have time to clench into a fist, so he had to open his mouth and release the execution dream. With a dang sound, it hit the tip of the flying sword. Sparks splashed, and the flying sword was shocked into several pieces. However, these several pieces once again turned into several sword lights and continued to stab toward Xiao Hua without mercy. Separate, Xiao Hua hurriedly urged the flying sword, and the execution dream immediately turned into several, facing the several sword lights. Finally, all the sword lights were destroyed. Grandma Xiao Hua breathed a sigh of relief, and his forehead was really sweating. Oh, it's a little weird. Xiao Hua suddenly realized something at this time. All the spiritual sense in the sword array was imprisoned, and he couldn't use any spells at all. But how could he use his spiritual sense to drive the flying sword? Didn't Martial Uncle DUI say that? Only the magical powers of sword cultivators can be used here. The magical powers of other cultivators are restricted. Thinking of this, Xiao Hua's eyes lit up, and he finally thought of a way to escape. However, since he was confident, he opened his Dharma eyes slightly and walked out of the sword formation. He wanted to see if he could walk out of the sword formation. However, when he had only taken a few steps away from the flying sword, an incomparably sharp sword chi blocked his way. That sword chi was light blue in his Dharma eyes, like a wall. Although Xiao Hua had yet to approach, that sharp sword chi had already cut through his Taoist robe. Xiao Hua had no doubt that if he were to force his way through, even if he had tempered his body for a long time, he would still be cut into pieces by this sword chi. Forget it. If that's the case, I can only use my sword formation to counter your sword formation. Xiao Hua wasn't surprised. He slowly walked back to the center of the sword formation, and with a wave of his hand, the sword pouch flew out. Rise! Xiao Hua pointed with his finger, and his primordial spirit used the sword pouch's method of using it. Come, come! 7 consecutive sword cries rang out, and the flying swords of Ling Yunwu and the others flew out from the sword pouch. When the 7 flying swords flew out, they immediately flashed with 7 resplendent lights inside the sword formation, illuminating the area around Xiao Hua. Within the light, the flying swords also fiercely trembled. Come! They emitted faint sword cries, and these sword cries became increasingly deep and powerful. In the end, the 4 flying swords in the formation also emitted faint sword cries. Woo! The 7 flying swords fell into the sword formation, and very naturally, they arranged themselves according to the sword pouch's formation, forming the appearance of the 7 stars formation. A faintly discernible sword intent was emitted from the sword tip, covering Xiao Hua from head to toe. Inside the 7 stars formation, all the sword lights fell into the boiling water like snowflakes and disappeared without a trace. What made Xiao Hua even more happy was that the sword lights outside the 7 stars formation also stopped and no longer fell into the 7 stars formation. Great! Xiao Hua let out a long breath and wiped the sweat from his forehead. Although the wishful staff didn't dance, it was still in his hand to deal with any accidents. After resting for a moment, Xiao Hua walked out of the great array, and the 7 stars great array moved along with him. Fortunately, the incomparably sharp edges of the sword array were considered nothing within the 7 stars great array. Xiao Hua very easily escaped from the sword array, surrounded by the 4 flying swords. When Xiao Hua came out of the sword formation, the 4 flying swords began to slowly vibrate, and it seemed like they were going to hide in the stone wall. In the space of several dozen feet, the illusion of the stone wall appeared again. Oh, this is Martial Uncle DUI Hui. Xiao Hua's gaze swept over and saw the lifelike corpse of the female cultivator. Her Taoist robe was similar to DUI Miaoqing's. Xiao Hua drove the 7 stars formation and walked over, storing the several corpses into the space, and then he immediately activated the sword formation. In just a moment, everything returned to its original state. In front of Xiao Hua's eyes was a huge dome. Below the dome was the 1,000-meter-tall rock pillar that he had seen before. The bottom of the rock pillar was extremely deep, like a huge spindle reaching into the depths of the rock abyss. Is there a big secret of sword cultivators here? Xiaohua looked around the rock pillar. It seemed that there were cracks all around, and those cracks had faintly disappeared just now. In other words, the rock pillar was surrounded by the sword formation laid out by the 4 flying swords. No matter which direction you came from, you had to pass through the sword formation in order to reach the rock pillar. If someone said that there was no big secret inside the rock pillar, even if you beat him to death, he wouldn't believe it. But what kind of secret was inside the rock pillar? Of course, Xiaohua wasn't in the mood to investigate at this time, because Dui Miaoqing had already said that this sword formation couldn't be resisted by a middle-stage golden core cultivator, so it must have been set up by a swordsman. Xiaohua boasted that he wasn't interested in a secret that could be valued by a swordsman. His task was to bring Dui Miaoqing's message and Dui Huey's suspicion back to Sky Patrol City. His task didn't include finding out this secret. That was something a nascent soul cultivator had to do. Xiaohua and Xiao Mao had to save them. As soon as he turned around, Xiaohua prepared to escape into the rock wall. He understood that this place was already deep under the lake, and the force inside the rock wall was very strong. As long as he didn't resist, he would definitely be sent to the surface. However, just as Xiaohua turned around, a feeling of reluctance came from the bottom of his heart. Oh! Xiaohua was stunned. Puzzled, he stopped and slowly turned around. When he faced the rock pillar, that indescribable feeling had already disappeared. When Xiaohua turned around again, that feeling didn't appear again. Strange. Xiaohua scratched his head. He really couldn't think of this so-called key secret of the Sword Cultivator War. What did it have to do with him? Could it be that he participated in the Sword Cultivator War with a mission to stop the swordsman's conspiracy? Was he born to end the Dao Cultivator War? Damn it, forget it. A group of Golden Core cultivators used the lives of many Foundation Establishment cultivators and Qi Refinement cultivators to train themselves. The illusory sword swordsmen also used the lives of a group of bright sword swordsmen and nurturing sword swordsmen to train themselves. Behind them are nascent soul cultivators and swordsmen. None of them are people that I can provoke. Thinking about the swordsmen of Chicken Crow Mountain, who split a large mountain with one sword. If I expose their secret, won't they chase me all over the Dawn Rain continent? It's already difficult for me to deal with Taoist Jing Si, let alone a few more swordsmen. Xiaohua had just seen Feng Buping's power and was very afraid of the swordsman. He turned around and was about to leave, but after taking 2 steps, another kind of understanding was born in his mind. I was wrong. Xiaohua stopped, his gaze somewhat deep. He used his hand to pinch his chin and turned to look at the stone pillar. I had a feeling of karma when I came to the Great Array of Quanji Mountain. Originally, I thought I was going to send a message to the Imperial Thunder Sect's elders that I was safe. But after I met Li Zongbao, I thought I was going to send a message to Fairy Hongxia that I was safe. But after I came to the Gale Snowfield, I thought I was going to save Xiao Mao. But after I arrived at the Yinyang Twin Springs Mountain Spirit Stone Vein, I thought I was going to save Dui Miaoqing. But now, I finally realized that I came here to expose this huge secret of the sword cultivators. All the karma is pushing me to stop the war and save the lives of thousands of cultivators. Since the hand of karma has such an arrangement, I will also fight with my life. The corner of Xiaohua's mouth raised a trace of a smile. It's not like I haven't been chased by a nascent soul cultivator before. So what if there are a few more swordsmen? If they have the ability, then catch up to me first. In an instant, Xiaohua's heroic spirit soared to the sky. That lofty ambition was like a torrential river, as if he could seize the moon in the sky and capture the dragon in the sea at any time. With a wave of his hand, he took out the wishful staff that he had stored in his space. Xiaohua steadily walked in front of the stone pillar and sized it up again. After looking for a long time, he didn't feel anything special, so Xiaohua opened his transcendence vision again. Seeing the situation of the stone pillar in his transcendence vision, Xiaohua couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. The whole stone pillar looked like a spindle, with two sharp ends and a bulge in the middle. And where the bulge was, there was a steady stream of light blue brilliance. This brilliance flew to two parts. One part rushed to the top of the spindle and gathered at the sharp end. The sharp end had a faint fiery red color, which seemed brilliant and obscure. The other part rushed to the bottom of the spindle and also gathered at the sharp end, but the sharp end had a faint emerald color, which was bright and obscure. Inyang 2 Springs Mountain, Inyang 2 Poles. Seeing these two different points and brilliance, he immediately thought of the two poles of magnetism that he had seen before in the dark secret ground. Isn't this spindle similar to the magnetism? This is the core of the 2 Springs Mountain. Xiao Hua secretly nodded. I reckon that the sword cultivators were originally mining here, and then they dug a tunnel from the vein to this abyss. And through this abyss, the swordsman found the core of the 2 Springs Mountain. That crack might be the work of the swordsman. Chapter 24:14. But what secret is there in this place? What is the key that will affect the sword battle? Xiao Hua looked at the blue brilliance that was pouring down like a waterfall before his eyes. He searched everywhere he knew, but he couldn't find anything strange. I'm afraid I have to go in and take a look. Xiao Hua closed his Dharma eyes, activated his flying technique, and flew towards the stone pillar. Who would have thought that just as his figure entered the abyss of the stone pillar, a kind of heavy pressure from all directions squeezed over. Xiao Hua didn't dare to be negligent. He activated the Dharma power in his meridians, and the brilliance around his body flashed repeatedly, trying to resist this mountain-like heavy pressure. However, the more he activated his Dharma power, the stronger the pressure became. Even when Xiao Hua activated the immortal body bestowment technique, he absorbed the light blue spiritual energy of heaven and earth while using his Dharma power. The pressure also rose steadily. It can't be. Seeing that his Dharma power had reached the limit, the pressure was still increasing. Xiao Hua was somewhat dumbfounded. According to this trend, in a few more breaths of time, he would be crushed into a meat patty by this pressure. Buzz! Xiao Hua had no choice but to activate the dragon transformation art to the limit again, and the Dharma power that far surpassed the late gold core stage surged out. Impossible! Xiao Hua himself didn't dare to believe that the pressure was pressing him to death, and the light around his body had already dimmed. Even if it is a swordsman who transformed into a sword, their Dharma power— damn it, this young master misunderstood again. Xiao Hua thought of the Dharma power of a swordsman and unconsciously realized something. He hurriedly reduced his Dharma power, and, as expected, the pressure also decreased along with his Dharma power. Of course, the pressure didn't disappear because of the disappearance of Xiao Hua's protective light. It even weakened to a certain extent and then increased again. However, with the strength of Xiao Hua's body, it was more than enough. Alas, there are many dangerous places in this world that test the body. Those Dharma power, divine sense, and so on are all limited. Xiao Hua sighed in relief, and once again wiped the cold sweat on his head. He muttered to himself, but without Dharma power and divine sense, it is impossible to reach these dangerous places. The heavenly Tao is unpredictable, following which Xiao Hua flew slowly. He tried to use as little magic power as possible and use more ethereal steps to slowly approach the stone pillar. Although the rock pillar looked very calm, when Xiao Hua approached it, a powerful force pulled Xiao Hua straight up, as if it was being pushed by a huge stream of water. Xiao Hua had seen the light blue brilliance before, so he knew that it was because the brilliance was pouring down. Therefore, he retreated a bit and flew towards the center of the spindle. Sure enough, the tearing force gradually weakened. When Xiao Hua arrived at the depths of the abyss, he was in the middle of the stone pillar. The enormous force was indeed in a kind of relative equilibrium. Xiao Hua closed his eyes and carefully tasted the two different tearing forces as he gradually flew closer to the rock wall. Xiao Hua's upper body gradually emitted a fluttering sound. His hair also straightened up. Xiao Hua's lower body also emitted a fluttering sound, but his entire Taoist robe was facing down. As Xiao Hua got closer, the two forces became increasingly stronger. Although they were balanced, they actually had a tendency to split Xiao Hua into two. Fortunately, this young master has been diligently tempering his bones and refining his body for the past few decades, so I can withstand this kind of tearing force that is rarely seen in the world. Xiao Hua said with a smile as he felt the faint pain in his flesh and bones. Of course, Xiao Hua stopped when he was about 10 zhang away from the stone pillar and opened his transcendence vision again. What he saw with his transcendence vision was that the two different lights were strangely separated in the middle. Each of them formed a kind of arc, and the part in the middle was about the size of a fist and actually emitted a cyan color that was as bright as water. After looking for a long time, Xiao Hua didn't gain anything. He slowly moved again, and while maintaining his balance, he circled around the stone pillar. This stone pillar was really big, at least 1,000 zhang. Xiao Hua didn't dare to move too fast, so it took him more than 2 hours to reach the other side. And this was only half of the stone pillar. It's here. When Xiao Hua patiently saw a small fist-sized hole in the middle of the cyan color, he immediately came to a realization. This is so similar to that Chicken Crow Mountains. Innate gold essence. Could it be there's an innate gold essence inside? Xiao Hua's eyes widened. Whenever a heavenly treasure appeared, he would be especially spirited. However, it's definitely not some innate gold essence. If it's some innate object, it should be, yes, an innate jellyfish. Xiao Hua immediately understood. Damn it, this is the thing that the 3 elders of the Blazing Fire Mountain have been looking for. It actually appeared here? Didn't that adept Blue Feather say that he had some clues? Could it be that he also knows about this place? However, if Adept Blue Feather knew about this place, he would have come here long ago. Why would he wait until today? Sword cultivators also tampered with the innate gold essence. They must be tempering their bullshit flying swords, right? That Tai Cyan light can temper flying swords, making them incomparably sharp. How can this innate water chi temper flying swords? What special effects do flying swords have? Since there's a flying sword tempered by a sword cultivator right in front of me, how can this young master not take it? If it's taken into this young master's space, even if the heavenly emperor comes, this young master won't admit it. Xiao Hua's eyes twinkled with the brilliance of spirit stones. It's this fist-sized hole again. Xiao Hua's lips curled into a smile. Needless to say, this huge spindle must be condensed from innate water chi. No matter what kind of divine sense or sword chi, it won't be able to pass through. Only this one of the die number can pass through. However, aside from this young master's transformation technique, which cultivator can easily pass through this hole? According to this young master's thoughts, I'm afraid that even the nascent soul of a nascent soul cultivator wouldn't dare to enter, right? Xiao Hua laughed heartily. His body strangely twisted like a fried dough twist. Soon after, his body fell horizontally. However, the two forces from above and below actually stretched Xiao Hua horizontally. After several struggles, Xiao Hua finally charged into the fist-sized hole like a noodle. When Xiao Hua entered the several dozen zhang space, before his eyes was a boundless blue wave. This blue wave not only filled the heaven and earth, it also filled Xiao Hua. Moreover, within this blue wave, there were numerous seemingly large but not large, seemingly small but not small, seemingly omnipresent small bubbles continuously gushing out. Just as Xiao Hua's gaze came into contact with those bubbles, his eyes blurred, and he immediately lost his primordial spirit. Chapter 24:15. At the same time Xiao Hua was lost, the surrounding water bubbles rushed over and quickly wrapped around Xiaohua. Those water bubbles began to collide with each other, and slowly, a water bubble as big as Xiaohua gradually formed. Needless to say, from the great shielding power of the water bubble, as long as this water bubble was formed, the inside of the bubble would become a sealed space. In this sealed space, divine sense could not penetrate, and the spiritual energy of heaven and earth could not penetrate. Perhaps Xiaohua's fate was to become one with the innate water vapor. At this moment, a dragon's roar came from the middle of the blue water. The dragon's roar was both happy and sad, but at this time, it was more anxious. Little White, Xiaohua's primordial spirit, was lost somewhere, but when he heard this dragon's roar, it was so familiar. On that bloodthirsty night, on the night that changed Xiaohua's fate and Shang Huoming's fate, Little White also cried out like this. This cry was deeply engraved in Xiaohua's soul. In an instant, Xiaohua's primordial spirit struggled, and the understanding of Tianmen Mountain's Huang, he gave Xiaohua endless help. The pain, the loneliness, the helplessness, and the bondage of time seemed to have given Xiaohua's primordial spirit wings. His primordial spirit passed through many different illusions like a white horse and suddenly returned to his body. When Xiaohua woke up and saw the situation around him, he could not help but break out in a cold sweat again. Innate true water, melting everything into water. Such a sentence appeared in Xiaohua's mind. Who? Xiaohua took out the wishful steel rod without hesitation and waved it wildly. Sure enough, it was worthy of being an innate weapon that was not in the five elements. The seemingly unstoppable innate true water was actually beaten back by the wishful steel rod, forming a very small space in front of Xiaohua. Little White, Xiaohua shouted. He closed his eyes tightly and opened his Dharma eyes. In the deepest part of the vast ocean, there was a place that was as bright as a jade pearl. Below the jade pearl, there was a sword light that was like jade water. It was unusually dazzling. That's it. Although there were no more Little White's dragon roars, Xiaohua already knew that the soul of the escaping Little White dragon was near the jade pearl. Strangely enough, Xiaohua couldn't fly at all in this innate primordial water. He could only step on it step by step as he walked forward. The sound of waves could be heard as a boundless force pressed down from the front of Xiaohua, forcing Xiaohua to take a few steps back. On the contrary, when Xiaohua was retreating, there was also a huge force blocking him. Only Xiaohua could stand still and let the innate primordial water bubble up to him without any pressure. Xiaohua's Little White dragon hissed weakly. His heart had been anxious for a long time. Seeing the pressure of the innate primordial water, he was also angry. With a cold snort, he waved the wishful staff towards the pressure in front of him. Fight! Sure enough, the heavy pressure was actually defeated by him. Then, Xiaohua quickly stepped forward. In this way, Xiaohua brandished the wishful steel staff to block the innate real water, and at the same time, hit the pressure that was invisible to the naked eye and approached the location of the jade pearl. Although Xiaohua's eyes couldn't open, the scene of the jade pearl was deeply imprinted in his mind. He saw that there was a space of about 10 feet, and there was no innate primordial water in this space. In the center of this space, there was a bright spot the size of a thumb. This bright brilliance revolved around a blue light spot that was much smaller than a mung bean. The endless pure blue color was born from this blue light spot. This pure blue brilliance shot out about 5 feet, rushed into the innate primordial water, and each brilliance could produce a bubble. In this pure blue light spot, there are also strands of green brilliance shooting out. As soon as these green brilliance shot out, it was immediately absorbed by a flying sword a few feet below the blue brilliance. And under this flying sword, there was a rotating sword array with a radius of a few feet. Through the countless palm-sized flying swords in the sword array, Xiaohua saw a small white dragon that was only a few feet in size struggling in pain. Because at every moment, there was a small flying sword piercing into its body. Although no blood flowed out, the small white dragon would twitch a little, and the shadow on its body would dim a little. Moreover, there seemed to be a rotating vortex above the sword array, which was pointing at the flying sword. While the small white dragon was struggling in pain, it also had to resist the attractive force of the sword array. Tai Wei green light? Xiao Hua's eyes swept over the green light, and his mind reacted very naturally. He knew that this Tai Wei green light was the same as the Tai Yi green light. They were both innate objects, but one was innate gold qi, and the other was innate water qi. However, his eyes only swept over the green light, and his gaze directly fell on the flying sword. The flying swords were very ordinary. Even the flying swords he saw didn't seem to be anything special. However, Xiao Huan knew that this thing was absolutely not ordinary. Even if it's not ordinary, so what? Even if it's used by a swordsman, so what? Xiao Hua did not hesitate to cover it with his hand, and the universe creator covered it. Who knew that just as Xiao Hua's Taoist robe covered it, the flying sword shook slightly, and a brilliant blue sword light was born from the flying sword. With a schwa sound, it was faster than lightning, and stabbed at Xiao Hua's Taoist robe. Kacha! Xiao Hua's heaven and earth sleeve met the sword light with a metallic sound, a strong force that Xiao Hua could not describe, and a kind of sharpness that Xiao Hua's universe creator could not resist came from the sword light. Xiao Hua's Taoist robe was immediately pierced by the sword light, and Xiao Hua's arm was incomparably high. The broken sleeve was like a butterfly fluttering around, and these butterflies fell into a bubble not far away and disappeared in a flash. It was unknown whether it was the butterflies in other people's dreams. Hiss! Xiao Hua took a breath, gritted his teeth, and said angrily, "Don't say that you're a flying sword. Even if you're a swordsman today, I will still beat you until you vomit blood." With that said, Xiao Hua's bare arms picked up the wishful steel staff with both hands, and hit the flying sword with a ding-ding-dang-dang sound. The flying sword was also powerful. With a slight vibration, several sword lights flew out and blocked the wishful steel staff. The sword lights were so sharp and so powerful that every time Xiao Hua's wishful steel staff was swung away, causing Xiao Hua's qi and blood to surge. Xiao Hua had never been so overbearing. The heavenly staff technique was displayed, and the wishful steel staff was like a continuous raindrop, hitting the flying sword. Finally, the flying sword that no one commanded was hit by Xiao Hua's wishful steel staff. With a loud dang sound, a layer of blue brilliance rippled above the flying sword, and the whole flying sword was shocked by the wishful steel staff. Since there was a first time, there was a second time, and a third time. Xiao Hua was like a blacksmith, picking up the wishful steel staff and hitting the flying sword with a ding-dang-dang sound. However, contrary to Xiao Hua's expectations, he hit the flying sword dozens of times. His hands and feet were a little weak, but the flying sword was still rippling with blue brilliance, and there was no damage at all. Even the sword array below it did not change. Seeing the blue light fall on the flying sword again, Xiao Hua smiled bitterly. "Grandma, I thought that the sword array was not easy to break, so I had to start with the flying sword. I did not expect this flying sword to be so powerful. It is worthy of being a flying sword tempered by the blue light. I am afraid that this flying sword can only be used by a swordsman. Humph, in that case, I will also take drastic measures to deal with you." Xiao Hua gritted his teeth and released his mind. He was about to collect the innate jellyfish, like the innate mother of gold. Who knew that when his mind came in contact with the innate jellyfish, the endless water light overflowed in his mind, and there was an endless illusion that wanted to lead his mind into it. Xiao Hua was shocked, and he was almost scared out of his wits. He hurriedly collected his mind, and his body was once again covered in cold sweat. No wonder the swordsman did not dare to accept this innate jellyfish. It is much more powerful than the innate mother of gold. Xiao Hua thought with lingering fear. Roar, the little white dragon in the sword array, seemed to be aware of Xiao Hua's trembling. It also let out a sad roar, and its whole body curled up, and its head was tightly tucked into its body. It seemed to have given up resistance and let Xiao Hua escape. How can this be? Xiao Hua's heart was filled with sorrow. Little White was his first playmate in the Xiaoyu continent, and Little White also gave him Longyu. It was really good to him. How could he watch as Little White's soul dissipated between heaven and earth? Moreover, the blue light sword obviously wanted to refine Little White into a sword spirit. This blue light sword must be used to kill a swordsman, and maybe Xiao Hua himself would also suffer. I'm afraid I can only use this method. If it doesn't work, this young master. Xiao Hua sighed slightly. This young master said a few words, but he could not say anything more. In front of absolute power, all words were nothing. Pooh! Xiao Hua opened his mouth slightly, and a stream of cold flame was spat out. However, the moment this cold flame touched the light blue brilliance, it was reflected blue, and then melted. It was still blue brilliance. Xiao Hua wasn't surprised. He was just testing the waters. Soon after, he opened his mouth slightly, and the scarlet red spiritual fire flew out like a thread, slowly shooting towards the blue light spot. See, the spirit fire's thread passed through the light blue brilliance, as if it had nothing to do with it. Although Xiao Hua's eyes were closed, everything was reflected in his mind, and his heart was filled with slight expectation. As expected, the spirit fire did not disappoint him, and without any obstruction, it reached the side of the innate mother of gold. Rap! Xiao Hua was overjoyed. He used the fire manipulation art, and the spirit fire nimbly wrapped the innate mother of gold. All the innate primordial water and the blue light were wrapped in the spirit fire. Wong, the flying sword, let out a sorrowful cry, as if it sensed something wrong. Chapter 24:16. Keep. Xiao Hua didn't care how much it was. He released his mind and wrapped the spiritual fire, taking it along with the innate jellyfish into the space. The innate jellyfish that entered the space was the same as the innate gold jellyfish from before. They were all well-behaved, without any abnormalities. Good. Xiao Hua laughed heartily. The flying sword let out a mournful cry. Suddenly, a dazzling blue sword light flashed. The flying sword turned into a rainbow and rushed toward the fist-sized hole. The sword array under the flying sword also followed. White E-Soul was caught in the sword array and was forced to fly out. Want to leave? No way. Xiao Hua shouted. He did so much and took such a big risk. Wasn't it just to save Little White Soul? With a wave of his hand, the heaven and earth sleeve was unleashed. The sword array that imprisoned Little White was under Xiao Hua's hand. This time, Xiao Hua urged all the magic power in his body. Sure enough, the flying sword rushed through Xiao Hua's arm, and the sword array under the flying sword was grabbed by Xiao Hua's bare arm, on the verge of collapse. Ka! A sword light flew out from the flying sword and slashed towards Xiao Hua's arm. Xiao Hua naturally didn't dare to be negligent. He waved the wishful staff and hit the sword light. Kacha! The sword light was smashed into thousands of fragments. However, the fragments fell on Xiao Hua's arm. Shwa, shwa, shwa. The fragmented sword light fell like snowflakes, but every crystal sword light slashed across Xiao Hua's arm, leaving a scar. This Tai Wei Cyan light sword was actually so powerful. Xiao Hua's body, which had been tempered before, was still cut open by its broken sword light. Suddenly, a stream of blood flowed out from Xiao Hua's arm, dripping down his arm. Xiao Hua's physical body hadn't been injured for a long time. He originally thought he could endure this simple sword wound, but when the sharp edge in his flesh seemed to pierce his soul, a numbing sensation that seemed to penetrate deep into his bone marrow transmitted over. He couldn't help but groan. Even his arm faintly trembled, and the magic power in his arm seemed to be on the verge of collapse. How could the Supreme Light Sword be an ordinary flying sword? The wound caused by the sword light was faintly flashing with a light blue color. That blue color was gradually corroding Xiao Hua's skin and flesh, gradually enlarging the wound. It even had a tendency to penetrate deep into Xiao Hua's heart. Perhaps Xiao Hua's only option now was to release the sword array, or perhaps Xiao Hua's only option now was to quickly consume a pill to prevent the Supreme Light's invasion. But Xiao Hua, can he let go? He will definitely not let go of Xiao Hua. Even though the flying sword flew another few feet, the sword formation was still struggling in Xiao Hua's hand. The flying sword vibrated again, and an even thicker sword gleam flashed out. This sword gleam was extremely ferocious, and the flying sword must have realized that it was about to fly into a rage out of humiliation. Were you grabbing? Xiao Hua knew that his arm was in trouble, but seeing that he was determined, he stretched out his wishful staff and blocked the sword light. At the same time, he struck out horizontally, wanting to borrow the strength of the sword light to send it flying. But at this moment, the sword light suddenly tilted and split into two. One pierced the sword array, and the other pierced Xiao Hua's chest. Grandma, is this still a flying sword? Xiao Hua was extremely shocked. At this time, he could only choose one. Either use the wishful staff to break the flying sword that was piercing the sword array, or block the flying sword that was piercing himself. He had no third choice. For Xiao Hua, he only had one choice. The sword array of the little white dragon was also expanding. Oh, Xiao Hua was surprised and was considering whether to withdraw his heaven and earth sleeve technique. Roar, the little white dragon seemed to know that this was his last chance to escape, and he was also desperate. A series of dragon roars were issued, and all of a sudden, it grew to a size of 10 feet, and the dragon's body was still growing. Pa! There was a soft sound, and in the sword array that the little white dragon had found a flaw, there was a crack between the two flying swords. This crack suddenly became the breakthrough point of the sword array's collapse, and the dragon head of the little white dragon suddenly came out of the sword array. Fight! Xiao Hua was overjoyed, and the staff in his right hand was raised high again, and like a mountain, it hit the Supreme Light's sword. In the face of the whistling wind above the wishful staff, the Tai Wei green light sword flashed a burst of sword light, and then the sword array that imprisoned the little white dragon disappeared, and the Tai Wei green light sword turned into a blue light, quickly rushed out of the rock pillar and disappeared into the hole. Good! Xiao Hua breathed a long sigh of relief and turned to look at the little white dragon. Who would have thought that once the little white dragon escaped from the imprisonment of the sword array, it immediately shrank rapidly. Not only did it return to its previous snake-like appearance, its appearance became even dimmer. It was like the first light of dawn, faintly discernible. Little white, Xiao Hua was shocked, and regardless of his injuries, he released his mind and put the little white dragon's soul into his space. However, suddenly Xiao Hua thought of another thing, and he took back his mind, returned to the space, and called out Goldie. Chapter 24:17. Sure enough, the moment Goldie saw White E's soul, it immediately woke up. The yellow fur on its body suddenly stood up, and even its huge tail stood straight up. Xiaobai was also shocked. Roar! It struggled and swayed with difficulty. Xiao Hua didn't have time to say anything to Xiao Wang and hurriedly put it back into the space. Xiao Wang feeds on souls and cores. Xiaobai is also a soul. Naturally, we can't put them together. Xiao Hua was in a difficult position, and in my space, I can't control it right now. What should I do? If I had a Dharma body before, I could try to send it in. Can the Buddha, Sarira, succeed? Xiao Hua thought of his Buddha fire. Will the Buddha fire burn Xiao Bai to death? Xiao Hua hesitated again. Let's try it. However, when Xiao Hua wrapped his mind around Xiao Bai, there was another problem. His mind seemed to be completely unable to sense Xiao Bai's soul. Oh, Xiao Bai's a soul. It's not a tangible thing. My mind can't collect it. Right, don't I have soul strands? When Xiao Hua saw that little white dragon's soul was about to dissipate, he didn't dare to think about it anymore. He quickly pulled out the soul thread from his heaven ring and wrapped it around Little White Dragon. Little White Dragon, who was bound by the soul thread, panicked. It didn't understand what was happening and struggled with all its strength. Io, seeing Little White struggle, Xiaohua originally didn't care about it. However, a strong force was transmitted from the soul strand, pulling his soul strand by a lot in an instant. Xiaohua didn't find it strange. The soul also has strength. However, Xiaohua couldn't communicate with Xiaobai. He could only tap his forehead and make some gestures with his hands. He didn't know if Xiaobai could understand. Moreover, Xiaohua released even more soul strands. Xiaobai didn't know if it saw Xiaohua's gestures or if it understood. It didn't have too many methods to struggle. After struggling for a while, it gave up and could only let Xiaohua ravage it. Xiaohua carefully pulled back the strand of soul force, but the strand of soul force was different from when he was using a soul armament. He could feel that Xiaobai's soul was extremely heavy, as if he was dragging a large object. Xiaohua somewhat understood. Duo cultivation techniques emphasize soul remembrance and soul power, but this technique of mine is half-baked, and I didn't really focus on it, so I didn't really understand it before. Now, he knew that even though the soul was invisible to the naked eye and spiritual will, it was still an incorporeal being. However, to the soul strands, they were tangible objects. Although White E's soul had already dimmed and was on the verge of collapse, it still had weight to the soul strands. My soul strands, in my own soul cultivation technique, is only at the heaven-encompassing soul, which should be the beginning of soul cultivation. The soul power of my soul strands is also very weak. Or maybe my soul power is weak, so my soul strands don't have much strength. However, in any case, Xiaohua still had soul strands and had some soul power. As he moved bit by bit, Little White Dragon's soul actually passed through the magic eye imprint and slowly entered that mysterious place. Seeing Xiaohua's enormous mysterious dark cloud and the faint rumbling of thunder within the dark cloud, Little White Dragon was extremely alarmed. However, smelling the sweet smell of black silk wood in that mysterious place, Little White Dragon was a bit excited and opened its dragon mouth, opening and closing it. Oh! Seeing this, Xiaohua retracted his soul strands into the heaven-encompassing soul and took out the black silk wood. Oh, Little White Dragon was happy and slowly swam around the black silk wood as if it was extremely enjoying it. And so this black silk wood is not only useful for soul cultivation techniques, it's also useful for White E's soul. Xiaohua thought to himself, and then retracted the black silk wood back into the heaven-encompassing soul. Seeing the black silk wood move into the dark cloud, Little White's soul also chased under the dark cloud, but seeing the enormous dark cloud, it was abnormally afraid. You come in too. Xiaohua's soul strands reached out again and wrapped around Little White Dragon's soul. However, Little White Dragon was still afraid and used all its strength to struggle, as if the dark cloud was a dragon's pool and tiger's den. Once it entered, its life would be in danger. You come in. Xiaohua was a bit anxious. His soul strands tightly wrapped around Little White, and Little White was indeed exhausted and didn't struggle anymore. In the end, it was pulled into the heaven-encompassing soul by Xiaohua. Xiaohua actually didn't know the danger of this action, not only for Little White Dragon, but even for himself. It was also extremely inappropriate. The soul has always been a cultivator's vital point. Even if the body enters the cycle of reincarnation, the soul is also the last thing one can rely on. Xiaohua actually allowed Little White Dragon's soul to enter his own soul. On one hand, Little White's life and death is already under his control. His soul can transform Little White's soul into his own soul with a thought. On the other hand, if Little White's soul is stronger than Xiaohua's soul, it will inevitably cause harm to Xiaohua's soul. Even if the two of them coexist peacefully, Xiaohua's soul will still cause harm to Little White's soul. Xiaohua was ignorant and didn't know. Although Little White knew, it was no match for Xiaohua's fierceness and could only feel wronged. Since ancient times, There were no better people than this who did bad things with good intentions. However, fortunately, when Little White's soul arrived at the heaven of surrounding aura, the entire heaven of surrounding aura was filled with the rich black silk with qi, and Xiaohua's primordial spirit slowly swam inside, slowly emitting fluctuations. Little White Dragon immediately understood. "Thank you." A timid, extremely tired, and extremely small voice was transmitted to Xiaohua's mind. "Little White? Is it you?" Xiaohua was already familiar with Little White's voice transmission and replied very naturally. Little White? I." That voice was a little happy and a little confused. Damn, that's right. Xiaohua was greatly embarrassed. Little White was just his own wishful thinking. Little White still didn't know. I'm called Little White. You, what's your name?" "I'm called Xiaohua. I gave you the name Little White. If you don't like it, then forget it. You, what's your name?" Xiaohua said very apologetically. "My name." At this point, Little White was a little heavy and seemed to be even more hesitant. Just call me Little White." Xiaohua, you must not devour." "Little White, don't worry, Little White, I won't." Xiaohua simply didn't know what devouring was and immediately comforted it. "You should first recuperate here. When your soul condenses, I will let you out." I'm tired." Little White's voice became even smaller. "Thank you, Xiaohua." Xiaohua was just about to reply when he saw Little White close its eyes. Its soul also slightly danced in the heaven ring of qi, and the surrounding black silk wood's aura also swarmed over. "All right, let it recover." Xiaohua's heart was greatly relieved and slowly retreated from the heaven ring of qi. At this time, within the stone pillar, there was already no dazzling blue brilliance, only rich, innate true water. However, around Xiaohua, there were still some gaps that the innate true water had not flooded. Of course, this gap was also slowly shrinking. Only now did Xiaohua have the heart to look at the injury on his left arm. He saw that the place where the blue light lingered previously had already been devoured by the golden threads in Xiaohua's blood. Not only did the blood not flow, the sword scar also showed signs of recovery. And body cultivators really have an advantage in healing injuries. Perhaps those beast cultivators chose to cultivate with spirit beasts because of their strong self-healing ability? Thinking about this, Xiaohua took out the wishful staff and was about to rush out of the innate true water, preparing to leave through the hole in the stone pillar. However, Xiaohua's eyes lit up when he saw the boundless primordial water. With a wave of his hand, he took out the mist pearl that Dui Miaoqing had given him. After that, he gave Dui Miaoqing's storage pouch a simple look and took out the jade slip for refining the mist pearl. Xiaohua immersed his divine sense in it and looked for a moment. He knew that the refining of the tide bead was similar to that of the blue water bead, and the corner of his mouth revealed a trace of a smile. He did not need to completely refine the tide bead. He only needed to slightly control it. Immediately, Xiaohua did not delay. He urged his magic power and cast a few refining spells on it. In just a moment, the tide bead emitted a faint blue light again. "Go!" Xiaohua did not hesitate. He pointed his finger, and a misty tide pearl rushed into the Xiantian primordial water. Instantly, a tiny whirlpool appeared above the misty tide pearl, and the Xiantian primordial water poured into the misty tide pearl like a swarm of bees. Xiaohua laughed sinisterly. There was so much innate true water in the stone pillar. If he did not take it now, he did not know who would benefit from it in the future. After absorbing the innate true water, the tide bead's brilliance became more and more brilliant. It grew bigger and bigger until it was more than a foot long. The blue brilliance was dazzling, and there was a layer of blue halo around it. It was really hazy like the tide. However, at this time, the innate true water in the stone pillar space had only decreased by 30%. The quality of this tide bead is also not good. Xiaohua smacked his lips. He was really regretful in his heart. Immediately, Xiaohua took out the magic tool that could hold liquid that Sun Shu gave him. That magic tool also contained snake venom, which was also very precious. Xiaohua had no choice but to put it into the space. Seeing that he did not have such a magic tool, Xiaohua looked at Dui Miaoqing's storage pouch. However, when Xiaohua was looking for the jade slips earlier, there were a few magic tools inside, but they did not look like they could hold liquid. Xiaohua could only look for the storage pouches left behind by Dui Hui and the others. Great! When Xiaohua took out a 1-foot-long cyan jade bottle from the storage pouch of a bald cultivator with great difficulty, he could not help but smile brilliantly. This jade bottle was thin and long, and there was a grain-sized gap at the mouth of the bottle. Moreover, there were some cracks on the body of the jade bottle. It was unknown whether the jade bottle itself was different or the jade bottle was damaged. However, when Xiaohua took out the jade slips from the cultivator's storage pouch, he was somewhat dumbstruck. This was because in addition to the jade slips, there were also a few golden leaves inside the storage pouch. They were exactly the same as the golden centipede that Kunlun's sex Han Zhu gave him. Chapter 24:18. Could this cultivator be a Buddhist disciple? Xiaohua hadn't heard any news about the Buddhist sect for a long time. When he suddenly saw it here, he was shocked. That bastard Han Zhu gave me a small golden Buddha and told me to use my Buddhist sense to examine it when I'm in the late foundation establishment stage. He wants to take me to the ruins of the Buddhist sect. Damn, this young master is doing well in the Tao sect. Why would I go to the ruins of the Buddhist sect? Forget it. Let's not talk about him. Let's see how to use this magic tool first. Xiaohua placed several golden puppets into the Buddha Sarara and looked through them one by one. When he saw one of the golden pages, he suddenly stopped. After waiting for another incense stick's worth of time, Xiaohua opened his eyes and put the golden puppets into his space. He glanced at the jade bottle and said with a smile, "So this is a Buddhist magic tool called the clear water bottle. It's said to be able to hold the water of 100 rivers. Come, let this young master see if this clear water bottle meets this young master's wishes." While speaking, Xiaohua took out the Buddha Sarara and saw a faint golden light sprinkle all over. Xiaohua then threw the clear water bottle in front of the Buddha Sarara. The Buddha Sarara put its palms together, one hand pointing to the sky and the other pointing to the ground. Its face was full of compassion. Lin, the Buddha Sarara, lightly chanted, and a Sanskrit incantation flew out and landed on the clear water bottle. Soon after, a hazy and indistinct figure flew out from the clear water bottle and landed in front of the Buddha Sarara. After slightly cupping its hands, it turned into a light smoke and disappeared. Soon after, Xiaohua's Buddha sense was on a clear water bottle. According to the method described in the golden puppet, he refined the clear water bottle bit by bit. The refining method of this Buddhist magic tool seems to be somewhat similar to the island guarding token of Sunset Island. Xiaohua thought to himself when he saw the Buddhist light on the clear water bottle disappear in a flash. Behind the golden puppet, there were naturally many golden puppet records regarding the use of the clear water bottle. However, Xiaohua was impatient and didn't dare to stay any longer. He only wanted to see how to refine and activate the clear water bottle to collect true water. The method of controlling this Buddhist artifact is different from that of a magic artifact. It requires the use of Buddhist seals to drive psychokinesis. Xiaohua only cultivated the Buddha Sarira in a daze. How could he know what psychokinesis is? Helpless, Xiaohua tossed the water bottle into the air like a basic magic tool of the Tao sect. First, he habitually pointed at it with his hand, as if he was urging his magic power. Then, he suddenly realized something and hurriedly formed a Buddha seal with his hand. The Buddha seal was somewhat similar to a spell, so it wasn't too difficult for Xiaohua. However, the Buddha seal was formed, but what about the power of thought? Who the hell knows where it is? However, the strange thing was that as the pure water bottle tilted slightly, a very gentle suction force was produced from the pure water bottle. It was even softer than the wind as it slowly floated towards the innate primordial water. Although the suction force was gentle, as soon as it came into contact with the innate primordial water, all the bubbles and other things were sucked into the pure water bottle. It was even more efficient than the tidal beads. The Buddha's heart is merciful and emphasizes on helping those who are fated. This Buddhist artifact is also the same. It doesn't have any smoke or fire. Although it's extremely gentle, it also can't be resisted. Xiao Hua seemed to have understood something, but he was also extremely confused. But I didn't control this pure water bottle. How could this primordial water? Forget it. Isn't it good to be able to collect it? Let's talk about it later. That Buddhist artifact, pure water bottle, was indeed powerful. In less than 2 hours, more than 90% of the innate primordial water in the stone pillar had been absorbed. Okay. Don't absorb anymore. Leave some for the Yin-Yang Twin Springs Mountain. Xiao Hua was grinning from ear to ear. This Buddhist artifact was really to his liking. Seeing that this several thousand feet wide area was empty, the remaining innate primordial water was divided into 2 parts and gathered on both sides of the stone pillar. It slowly turned into a light blue brilliance and seeped out of the stone pillar. Xiao Hua hurriedly used his Buddhist consciousness to control the pure water bottle and collected it. Let's go. Xiao Hua was perfectly satisfied. He clapped his hands and once again drilled out of the fist-sized hole. Ouch! However, Xiao Hua was indeed a little too pleased with himself. When he flew out, he forgot to maintain his balance. In a moment of carelessness, he was sucked in by the powerful force outside the stone pillar. His body involuntarily flew towards the top of the spindle. Oh, forget it. Xiao Hua just wanted to resist, but when he saw the cliff above the abyss, he laughed. Isn't it the same as going out? Let's go from here. This was practically the feeling of falling from the top of a waterfall. In the beginning, it was still somewhat slow, but as he fell and the water flow became stronger, his speed became faster and faster. However, at this moment, Xiao Hua was sliding down from the middle of the stone pillar. This kind of feeling really gave Xiao Hua a kind of illusion, a kind of strange feeling. Oh! A loud and clear sound rang out. Like 100 rivers returning to the sea, countless light blue rays of light rushed into the rock wall. Xiao Hua, who had already used the earth escape technique, also entered the rock wall. Ouch, something's wrong. Just as Xiao Hua's body sank into the rock wall, a wave of scorching heat rushed into Xiao Hua's body from the rock wall. This heat not only attacked Xiao Hua's meridians, but also rushed into his blood vessels and bones. Xiao Hua's body could be said to have been tempered thousands of times. In an instant, it was somewhat difficult for him to endure. The primordial spirit inside the bone thread immediately increased the speed of the bone tempering technique. A faint orange brilliance slowly emerged. While resisting the scorching heat, it protected Xiao Hua's body. Xiao Hua's entire body was in endless pain. That scorching heat was simply like millions of black iron needles piercing into Xiao Hua's body. It was as if Xiao Hua was sent to the 9th heaven and was being baked under the sun. Even though Xiao Hua had practiced the fire escape technique, even though Xiao Hua had been tempered by the origin of fire, this kind of yang qi between heaven and earth still made Xiao Hua want to die. Xiao Hua didn't know how much time had passed, and he didn't know how far he had been swept away by the torrent. Suddenly, Xiao Hua felt a cool breeze coming from his feet. Although this cool breeze was faint, it was like a sweet rain from the 9 heavens. It made him feel like he had just escaped from prison. Great! I finally endured it. Xiao Hua was very happy. However, just as this joy was born, that cool breeze enveloped his entire body and actually turned into a powerful suction force. Where am I going? Xiao Hua stared blankly. Very habitually, he swept out his divine sense and couldn't help but be shocked. He saw that he was still inside the rock wall, but about 10 zhang away from the rock wall, a huge red skin gourd was precisely aimed at him. That cool and suction force was emitted from the mouth of that gourd. You're courting death. Xiao Hua was furious. He didn't have time to look elsewhere. With a flick of his right hand, the universe in the sleeve was used from his still intact Taoist robe. In an instant, that red-skin gourd was covered, and without hesitation, he easily sucked it into his own space. Ooh, An extremely shocked voice came from above. Chapter 24:19. At this time, Xiaohua had rushed out of the rock wall. He was much faster than a flying sword as he rushed into the air. Ha ha ha, of course it's this young master. Xiaohua's figure flipped a few times in the air. His divine sense swept through the entire space, and he laughed loudly. This was an underground space that was several times larger than the space of the rock pillars. There was a faint brilliance on the surrounding rock walls. The place where Xiaohua had rushed out from was a place that looked like a spout. There were countless places like this in the entire space. 3 illusory swordsmen were standing around the mouth of the fountain. These illusory swordsmen were all baffled. Their faces were filled with disbelief. How could a Tao sect disciple suddenly rush out of this place? Moreover, it was a Foundation establishment disciple of the Imperial Thunder sect. Even their red-skinned gourd had suddenly disappeared. Xiaohua had a complacent smile on his face. His divine sense swept through these illusory swordsmen. However, when his gaze fell on the 7 corpses of Tao sect disciples lying crookedly around the spout, his face unconsciously turned cold. Fortunately, although 2 of these 7 Tao sect disciples were from the Xuanyan school, Xiao Mao was not among them. These illusory swordsmen were not bystanders. They were the illusory swordsmen who had come to the Yinyang Twin Springs Mountain after attacking the Xuanyan school's Spirit Stone Mine. Except for Liao Chengkong of the Flying Feather sect, whom Xiaohua had previously used his Buddhist consciousness to peek at in the Gale Snowfield, he did not recognize the other 2. They were Zhong Haoshuan and Bai Jie of the Bright Sword sect. They had come to the Yinyang Twin Springs Mountain for no other reason than the Yinyang Sword Spirit that they had promised to the Black Phoenix Sword sect's LV Ruochang 5 years ago. Back then, Zhong Haoshuan had already gotten a clue about the 2 Yin and Yang sword spirits, and he had successfully nurtured the 2 sword spirits a year later. But these 2 sword spirits were too weak, and the Clear Sword sect didn't have 2 disciples with excellent physiques to nurture these 2 sword spirits. Thus, Zhong Haoshuan had set his sights on Yinyang Twin Springs Mountain. However, at that time, the Spirit Stone Mine formation had become more and more intense. Ling Yunwu and the others had died in an accident, causing the various sects to panic. Even the Clear Sword sect had their own missions and didn't dare to send extra people to Yinyang Twin Springs Mountain. Moreover, if they didn't have suitable sword cultivator disciples to nurture the sword spirits, they would need suitable blood essence. The Clear Sword sect wasn't willing to lose their own disciples, so they set their sights on the Tao sect disciples. Searching for these disciples took several years until recently, when Guanpeng invited the Clear Sword sect disciples to attack Xuanyan School's Spirit Stone Mine. One of Zhong Haoshuan's conditions was to find suitable disciples with suitable physiques to use as blood sacrifices. But what surprised Zhong Haoshuan was that the Yang sword spirit had already undergone the blood sacrifice, and the sword spirit within the sword gourd had clearly been nurtured, absorbing the Yang Qi underground. Suddenly, the sword gourd disappeared. Moreover, a Thunder Control sect disciple had inexplicably rushed out. How could he not fly into a rage? Kill. What else did Zhong Haoshuan need to say? If Xiaohua hadn't appeared, he really wouldn't have known the whereabouts of the sword gourd. But Xiaohua had already flown out. Even if his Taoist robe was somewhat shabby, with one sleeve missing and revealing his bare arms, who could say that a sleeveless hand couldn't conveniently steal melons? But following Zhong Haoshuan's furious roar, a flying sword that was like a scorching sun flew out from under his feet. This scorching sun sword was exceptionally ferocious within this Yang Qi, illuminating the entire space. A whistling sword wind, a trace of sword light that could pierce into Xiaohua's body, and a kind of earth-shattering confinement force that tightly suppressed Xiaohua's body in midair, all came from that scorching sun. Zhong Haoshuan's first move was the scorching sun sword. He didn't want to repeat Ling Yunwu's mistakes, even though he didn't know who killed Ling Yunwu. Ouch! Seeing such a powerful flying sword, Xiao Hua's face turned pale with fright. He hurriedly urged his flying technique with all his might, wanting to escape from the confinement of the scorching sun sword. However, no matter how he urged his magic power, he could only fly about a foot away from the sword intent, and was immediately enveloped by the scorching sun sword. Oomph! Seeing that Xiao Hua actually had magic power to struggle, Zhong Haoshuan's face revealed a trace of a smile. He was only an early-stage foundation establishment cultivator, so what if he could struggle? If he couldn't struggle, Zhong Haoshuan would be a little surprised. The scorching sun sword was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, it pierced Xiao Hua's chest. Seeing that the brilliance in the air was converging in one place and was about to sink into Xiao Hua's chest, Zhong Haoshuan's face finally relaxed a little. At this moment, Xiao Hua suddenly waved his hand, and a 2-foot-long wishful staff appeared. His figure flashed and hit the scorching sun sword with incomparable speed. The huge force on the sword light caused Xiao Hua's figure to stagger, and he really flew to Liao Chenkong's side. Liao Chenkong's face showed a trace of surprise, but his hand was still tucked in the sword armor, and he looked indifferent. "Haha, hit!" Xiao Hua's back was facing Liao Chenkong. When he was about 2 feet away, he suddenly turned around and raised his wishful staff. With a loud shout, he hit Liao Chenkong's forehead. Seeing that Xiao Hua's wishful staff was stirring up the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, Liao Chenkong laughed. At the same time, his feet leaped and his figure flew into the air. He laughed and said, "I was waiting for you to launch a sneak attack. I didn't expect you to really come." It turned out that Liao Chenkong had already seen through Xiao Hua's sneak attack plan. Oh, not good. When Xiao Hua saw Liao Chenkong fly out, his arms were exposed from his sword armor. His silver-white arms were obviously different from those of other sword cultivators. He couldn't help but turn pale with fright. His figure wanted to escape and attack another disciple of the Clear Sword sect. "Since you want to attack this old man, don't leave." Liao Chenkong smiled proudly, and a huge fist rushed toward Xiao Hua. Seeing that Liao Chenkong was only a few feet away from Xiao Hua, and that the fist was also close to Xiao Hua suddenly laughed. This young master also doesn't plan to leave. As he spoke, the somewhat crooked wishful staff suddenly became thick, and with a woo sound, it smashed towards Liao Chenkong's arm. Seeing Xiao Hua smile, Liao Chenkong also sneered. The wishful staff gave him a feeling of surging wind and clouds, but he believed in his fist more. Besides, the scorching sun sword was already behind Xiao Hua. As long as he blocked Xiao Hua's staff, the scorching sun sword would be able to pierce Xiao Hua's back. Dang! With a loud sound, a heart-wrenching pain came from his fist. It was a pain that he had never experienced since he mastered the technique. After the pain, his arm was numb, and he couldn't feel anything at all. This numbness not only numbed his arm, but also his whole body in an instant. Looking at Xiao Hua again, he slightly waved the wishful staff in his hand. The head of the staff that hit Liao Chenkong's fist immediately turned into the tail of the staff. The tail of the staff became the head of the staff, and it smashed towards Liao Chenkong's forehead like a bolt of lightning. "Liao Jin, you dodge!" Zhong Haoshuan shouted in the distance. "Run!" This shout really woke Liao Chenkong up. Sword light flashed on his body, and his figure quickly escaped. "Ha ha ha! Do you think you can escape?" Xiao Hua's figure was even faster. In just a flash, he stuck to Liao Chenkong's body, and the wishful staff hit Liao Chenkong's forehead with a poof sound. Needless to say, Liao Chenkong's fist was shattered by the wishful staff. As for his forehead, there was no need to mention it. Hiss! Zhong Haoshuan sucked in a breath of cold air. His eyes were wide open as he watched Liao Chenkong's headless corpse fall. He was shocked. "Phone? Phone to on you? What is your relationship with phone booping? Are you out of your mind?" Xiao Hua's figure spread out. He didn't avoid the scorching sun sword at all. Instead, he flew a few feet closer. The wishful staff in his hand once again struck out like a thunderbolt. With a crisp sound, The brilliance of the scorching sun sword splashed in all directions. Bai Jie, come and help me. Zhong Haoshuan was shocked. He really didn't expect it to be a blow that didn't move forward. Moreover, the power of the wishful staff was actually something that the scorching sun sword couldn't resist. Bai Jie was a grade 1 illusory swordsman. Seeing that Liao Changkong was easily killed by Xiao Hua and that Zhong Haoshuan's flying sword was also damaged in the blink of an eye, his heart was already trembling with fear. When he heard Zhong Haoshuan calling for him, he immediately urged the flying sword under his feet to rush over. Chi-la-la! A lightning-like flying sword flew out from Bai Jie's feet and attacked Xiao Hua. Ha-ha, Xiao Hua laughed. If it was any other flying sword, Xiao Hua would still have to think for a moment, but this was the lightning sword, so he didn't have any burden at all. Attack! Xiao Hua's left hand pulled the wishful staff. While attacking Zhong Haoshuan, his right hand was empty, and he urged his spiritual power to cast the thunder palm. Moreover, what was even more insidious was that after the thunder palm, Xiao Hua's spiritual power didn't stop at all. He urged it again, and the heaven and earth sleeve technique came out one after another. Kacha, a lightning much thicker than the lightning sword emerged from Xiao Hua's hand and blocked the lightning sword. You are the terrifying phoenix of the Imperial Thunder Sect? Seeing the thick lightning, Bai Jie suddenly thought of something and was extremely horrified. Terrifying phoenix? His voice didn't matter, but Zhong Haoshuan was also shocked. After all, his thoughts were the same as phone boopings. The reputation of this terrifying phoenix was really quite resounding. It didn't matter if Zhong Haoshuan was shocked, but Bai Jie was dumbfounded. Just as he roared out, he felt a shackling force that he was almost unable to resist enveloping him. He lost his head out of fear, disregarding the Thunderlight sword that was blocked by Xiao Hua's thunder palm, and tried his best to break free. In fact, he was a first-grade illusory swordsman. Xiao Hua's heaven and earth sleeve could certainly imprison him. As long as he used the lightning sword, he could also break this imprisonment force. However, when he struggled, the sword spirit in his mouth spurted out. It was not easy to break free from the heaven and earth sleeve. Moreover, when he just broke free from the imprisonment force, he suddenly felt a tingling pain in his Naiwan palace. The sword spirit was also not flowing smoothly. His figure stagnated and fell from midair. However, this was not the worst-case scenario. Just when he wanted to resist, the most frightening thing happened. A stronger wind than the imprisonment force just now pressed down from the top of his head. The wind was full of killing intent and sharpness. Chapter 2420. Bai Jie was shocked. Just as he raised his head slightly, he saw that Xiao Hua's staff, which was originally aimed at Zhong Haoshuan, was now only 3 feet away from his head. The 5 Elements Wishful Heaven Cudgel was an ancient weapon that did not belong to the 5 Elements Wishful Heaven Cudgel. Although Xiao Hua's Wishful Heaven Cudgel was far less powerful than the 5 Elements Wishful Heaven Cudgel, he was facing a grade 1 illusory swordsman like Bai Jie. Moreover, under a series of calculations such as the world and the sleeve and soul stab, the distance of 3 feet was covered in a flash. Bai Jie screamed as the Wishful Heaven cudgel hit his forehead. With the same muffled sound, Bai Jie's head was broken like a gourd. Xiao Hua laughed. His figure did not stop at all. He turned his head and used Wind Escape to force Zhong Haoshuan. Zhong Haoshuan took a breath, his eyes narrowed tightly. He gritted his teeth, and his whole body flashed with a strong brilliance, like a hedgehog with a long brilliance. Terrifying Phoenix, this old man did not expect to meet you here. Since you have appeared, Ling Yunwu and the others must have died. They can't keep you. Then let this old man keep you. Zhong Haoshuan enunciated each word clearly. The scorching sun sword also suddenly released a sword beam that soared into the sky. Zhong Haoshuan opened his mouth and spat out his sword essence. It fell into the scorching sun sword, and Zheng Haoxuan's figure flashed extremely quickly, transforming into a flying sword. Kill! Zheng Haoxuan said the last word of his life. His entire body landed on the flying sword. The brilliance of the flying sword that was already soaring into the sky became even more dazzling. It was truly like a rising sun. Moreover, a tragic feeling of mutual destruction blossomed from the sun. That blossoming death aura was like the rain lotus that Xiao Hua saw on the ice lake that day. It was extremely dazzling, and it blossomed petal by petal. Ha ha, Xiao Hua laughed. With a wave of his hands, Zheng Haoxuan, who had turned into a sword, suddenly felt a burning sensation all around him. Samadhi, true, fire. Zheng Haoxuan's gradually blurred consciousness was shocked, but he saw a circle of pure purple samadhi, true, fire burning around the scorching sun flying sword. In fact, the surrounding masculine energy was also ignited, and more fireballs than Zheng Haoxuan formed around him. Break! Zheng Haoxuan's heart was like dead ashes. He absolutely didn't expect Xiao Hua to actually know the true samadhi fire. He absolutely didn't expect Xiao Hua to have such an exquisite fire control technique. He also absolutely didn't expect Xiao Hua to add fuel to the fire at this time, drawing out the secret technique he originally wanted to activate ahead of time. Boom! With a loud sound, the entire space shook. Sword light overflowed in all directions, and sparks shot in all directions. However, this explosion wasn't aimed at Xiao Hua. It only exploded on the spot. The damage it dealt to Xiao Hua, Sai, could be ignored. When the flame gradually disappeared, Xiao Hua flew over from an extremely far place. The instant of the explosion was enough for Xiao Hua to fly extremely far away. Alas, Xiao Hua looked at the mess on the ground, shook his head, and said, "It's really a pity. An illusory swordsman transformed into a flying sword." Then, Xiao Hua landed on the ground and looked at the 7 Dao sect disciples who were killed earlier. Their corpses had been scattered by Zheng Haoxuan's explosion, but by Jie and Liao Chunkong's corpses were still intact. Xiao Hua reached out and took the 2 people's storage bags. After searching for a moment, he found a sword bamboo slip. He immersed his divine sense in it for a moment and sneered, "They deserve to die. They actually sacrificed the lives of my Dao sect disciples to the sword spirit. This kind of sword spirit is also extremely tyrannical. How can it be used? I'm afraid the Dao of the sword has been defeated again, right? However, I still want to go and see whether Xiao Mao is still alive in this world. Even if he's dead, I will avenge him." Xiao Hua laughed sinisterly. His figure flew up using the wind escape technique and rushed out quickly along the route drawn in the sword bamboo slip. This was an underground space that was thousands of feet in size, similar to the space where Zheng Haoxuan and the others sacrificed the red-skinned gourd sword spirit. However, the scene within was completely different. On the top of the rock wall that was tens of thousands of feet tall, countless 6-petal crystals were connected to each other. Faint blue light faintly flowed over them. As this light flickered between the 6 petals of the crystal, an incomparably cold aura was emitted. The threads of aura passed through the crystal and disappeared into the rock wall. Not a trace of it could be seen. Moreover, between these countless 6-petaled crystals, there were circular crystal pillars that were a few feet or 10 feet in size. They were directly inserted into the rock wall, and their whereabouts were unknown. Looking at the entire space, the faint blue light was like a gem that was constantly blooming, filling the entire space. This blue light was extremely cold, and there were fine rays of light that were born from all over the space. These fine rays of light did not fall to the ground, but instead rushed into the rock wall at the top of the space with the brilliance, and turned into little crystals. The extremely cold, faint blue light came from under the space, from the sharp tips of the rock spikes that rose from the ground. These rock spikes were extremely similar to the stone bells that were usually hung upside down in caves. They were milky white in color, and on the sharp rock spikes, thumb-sized fluorescent lights flashed brightly, similar to the stone stalactites that dripped from the top of the stone bells. However, when the stone stalactites dripped to the ground, the thumb-sized fluorescent light blue light pierced into the air, spreading throughout the entire space. In a corner of this strange and cold space, a green-skinned bottle gourd was faintly emitting a green-blue light. It was even vibrating rhythmically. The mouth of the gourd was facing down, facing a huge rock spike. A faint blue light that could be seen with the naked eye covered the tip of the rock spike, and the blue light from the fluorescent lights mixed into the green light and was absorbed by the green gourd. Looking at the surroundings of the huge rock spike, there were 7 Tao sect cultivators lying on the ground. 5 of them had already died. The faces of these 5 corpses were all bruised, and their faces were twisted with pain. This ferocious expression was frozen on their faces, as if their bodies had been frozen by some kind of coldness. Beside the 5 corpses, there were still 2 cultivators. One was a white-haired female cultivator, and the other was Xiao Mao, whose face was slightly weathered, and whose eyes were filled with viciousness. The 2 of them sat cross-legged on the ground. Their bodies flickered with a faint protective light. On the surface of the protective light, there was a thin layer of icy blue. Within the icy blue, crystalline light could be vaguely seen. If it weren't for this protective light, Xiao Mao and the female cultivator would have been frozen into popsicles like the corpses of the other 5 cultivators. However, Xiao Mao and the female cultivator couldn't move at all. Within the cold blue, there were several sword lights that moved like poisonous snakes and firmly restrained the 2 of them. Above Xiao Mao's head, next to the green gourd, stood 3 sword cultivators. One of them was someone Xiao Hua had seen on the Gale Snow Plains. It was the bird cultivator from the Quilted Mountain sect, Yu Ming, who had appeared with phone booping. The other 2 were the female cultivators of the Clear Sword sect, Zhong Mingtian and Feng Qing. At this time, Yu Ming was standing high up with his hands crossed. There was no light around him to resist the extreme cold. There was a hint of arrogance in his eyes as he coldly looked at the actions of the 2 female cultivators who were only grade 1 illusory sword cultivators. Zhong Mingtian and Feng Qing both had their eyes closed. Their sword robes were a bit messy at this time, and their exposed skin showed a green luster. This luster reflected the white hair on their heads, giving them a different kind of charm. However, the expressions on their faces were not relaxed at all. The corners of their eyes twitched slightly, as if they were suppressing something. The 2 of them each stood on a flying sword. One of the sword lights was snow green, while the other was sky blue. The sword lights flashed and rushed into their bodies from time to time. Every time the sword lights flashed, their expressions became a bit better. At this time, the green gourd suddenly swelled. Not only did it emit a bright light, but an inexplicable fluctuation also spread out. Junior Sister Feng, it's time. Let's prepare for the 6th blood sacrifice. Zhong Mingtian's face showed a kind of excitement. He suddenly opened his eyes and said to Feng Qing. Feng Qing also showed a touch of blush on her face. She nodded and said, I will listen to Senior Sister's orders. Senior Yu. Zhong Mingtian raised his head and bowed to Yu Ming and said, Senior, please protect us. His tone was unusually respectful. He was not rude because Yu Ming was only grade 2 illusory sword cultivator. I know. You all can cast the spell. Yu Ming nodded proudly. Yes. Zhong Mingtian clapped his hand, and a blood-red talisman appeared in his hand. This talisman was very strange. It did not look like a yellow talisman. It was shaped like a skeleton, but it was the size of a palm. The talisman on it was also strange. It faintly emitted a dark green light, and it was somewhat similar to the green seal script. Go! Zhong Mingtian threw the talisman into the air and formed a sword seal with his hand. A snow-green sword light flashed under his feet, and a snowflake-like brilliance landed on the talisman. With his C sound, the brilliance actually ignited the talisman. The dark green flame burned the talisman into a ball of fire the size of a wicker basket. The talisman symbols on the ball of fire spun rapidly, and a burst of ghostly wails and howls could be heard from the ball of fire. Junior's sister Feng, Zhong Mingtian, saw the ball of fire rising and said anxiously, "The soul talisman has been activated. Quickly capture the Taoist sect cultivators." Yes. On the other side, Feng Qing was already prepared. With a grab of her hand, the white-haired female cultivator was sent flying into the air. She couldn't move at all. Kill. A trace of ruthlessness flashed in Feng Qing's eyes. The flying sword under her feet suddenly flew out and turned into a foot-long ice needle. It quickly pierced into the female cultivator's forehead. The flying sword was abnormally sharp. It sank into the female cultivator's forehead the moment it touched it. A drop of dirty blood flowed out from the wound on her forehead. Quick, senior sister Zhong, Feng Qing quickly formed a sword seal. Suddenly, the flying sword on the female cultivator's forehead turned into a sword light and retreated. Quick! Zhong Mingtian was also fast. He pointed with his finger, and the ball of fire also rushed toward the blood on the female cultivator's forehead at an extremely fast speed. It rushed into the female cultivator's forehead before Feng Qing's flying sword left, and the arrow of blood spurted out. Chapter 24-21. Seeing the dark green fireball enter the female cultivator's forehead, the female cultivator's face immediately showed extreme pain. Her facial features were all twisted, and even a dark green color appeared. Feng Qing's eyes flashed with lingering fear, followed by a flash of red. She knew in her heart that the soul talisman was refining the female cultivator's soul in her mind. That kind of pain was definitely not something a living person could experience. Once her soul was extracted by the soul talisman, this female cultivator's life would come to an end. There would be no reincarnation, no future. Suddenly, the female cultivator stretched out her four limbs, and a great power was born from her body. The sword light that was binding her broke apart inch by inch, and the light blue brilliance also turned into fluorescent light that scattered in all directions. Senior Yu. Seeing this, Zhong Mingtian's face was shocked, but his eyes flashed with joy. He knew that this was because the soul talisman had stimulated the female cultivator's in-water attribute potential at the end of the refinement process. This potential was exactly what was needed to refine the Green Gourd's sword spirit. Yuming didn't care at all. His arms suddenly shook, and two 10-feet-long wings grew out from his back. That pale blue light, mixed with white fluorescent light, came from the feathers of his wings. Yuming's voice turned into a bird's cry. His wings also flapped a few times, and that light flew out from between his wings. The light flew in the air like thorns, and the pale blue light became more and more intense. When it flew in front of the female cultivator who was violently twisting her four limbs, it had become an inch-long thorn. Almost at the same time, all the thorns pierced into the female cultivator's body at the same time. The female cultivator immediately became still, as if she was frozen in midair. Junior Feng. Zhong Mingtian ordered again. Feng Qing's flying sword once again shot out an ice thorn, and this time it directly pierced into the female cultivator's heart. Rise! Zhong Mingtian's face became serious. He formed a sword sign, and that dark green fireball actually came out of the female cultivator's head. At this time, the fireball was a kind of blood red, and its shape was constantly changing. The female cultivator's soul inside seemed to be tearing and trying to escape. Zhong Mingtian pointed his finger, and his body also slowly flew. That fireball obediently rushed toward the green calabash that was constantly vibrating. Seeing that the fireball was about to be sucked into the green-skinned gourd, Zhong Mingtian's face showed a trace of relief. But at this moment, a sudden change occurred. He heard a slight poof from the fireball, like a bubble bursting, and a blood-red shadow came out from the fireball. Senior Yu, help me. Zhong Mingtian's face was shocked, and a red flush rushed to his eyes, and he hurriedly shouted. Yuming was already prepared. Just as Zhong Mingtian shouted, he flapped his wings and flew close to the green calabash. The blue and white light between his wings suddenly extended, and it pierced toward the blood-red shadow that came out of the fireball. A heart-wrenching scream sounded. The blood-red shadow was confined to the edge of the fireball by the blue light, and it couldn't fly out. At this time, the green calabash's suction force was generated, and the fireball and the blood-red shadow were both sucked in. The blood-red shadow's scream became longer and longer, as if it was falling into a bottomless abyss. The green calabash suddenly became still again, and it no longer vibrated. The fluctuations also disappeared, but the suction force from the calabash increased greatly, and a large amount of light blue light rushed into it. "Thank you, Senior Yu." Zhong Mingtian's panic had not disappeared, and he bowed to salute. "Haha, it's no problem. You're only at the first grade of the illusory sword realm, and the blood sacrifice is a little difficult for these cultivators. Anyway, there's still this last one. Rest a little more." Yuming nodded slightly, turned around, and flew up again. "Yes, I understand." Zhong Mingtian smiled bitterly and looked at Feng Qing. The two returned to their original position and closed their eyes to rest. Zhong Mingtian didn't want to do this, but at this time, the sword cultivators were fighting fiercely with the Dao sect, and there weren't many disciples who could be transferred. Moreover, the flying swords that they practiced were of the cold attribute, and there were even fewer of them. It would be best if there was a second-grade illusory sword realm disciple here, but there was no other way. They could only rely on her and Feng Qing now. However, fortunately, there was Senior Yuming here, whose cultivation was unfathomable. Although he looked like he was only at the second grade of the illusory sword realm, she had been warned by Zhong Haoshuan that this person was a bird cultivator with a background, and his strength was far from what she could detect. Senior Zhong and the others should be here by now, right? Zhong Mingtian knew that the two of them were a little stretched. The blood sacrifice took too long, and Zhong Haoshuan and the others must have finished much faster. They should have finished by now. They should be on their way here. Another hour passed, and there were no signs of Zhong Haoshuan and the others. The green-skin gourd began to vibrate for the last time. Seeing the green-skin gourd's light ripple, Zhong Mingtian opened her eyes with a bitter smile. Her sword companions were still abundant, but the soul talisman didn't rely solely on her sword companions. There was also a secret technique of the clear sword sect. She had used this secret technique 6 times today, and even she herself felt a little tired in the depths of her soul. It was as if she had gone through several cycles of reincarnation, and her soul was almost unable to move. This is the last time, Zhong Mingtian thought to herself. She gritted her teeth, looked at Feng Qing, and said with a smile, "Junior Feng, this is the last time? We will be able to complete the task immediately." "Yes, it's all thanks to senior sister's strength." Feng Qing was also a little happy. She knew that this time, she had done a great service, and the Clear Sword sect would definitely reward her greatly. After Zhong Mingtian bowed to Yuming, Yuming frowned and said, "Little friend Zhong, do you want to rest for a while more?" "I won't hide it from Senior Yu." Zhong Mingtian didn't hide it. Resting for a while more is no different from resting for half a day, unless this junior can rest for 7 days. Yuming nodded, then looked at a small hole in the distance and said curiously, "Zhong Haoshuan and the others should be here by now. Perhaps Senior Zhong is waiting for us to meet up." Feng Qing smiled. After all, this place isn't suitable for the 3 senior brothers' flying swords. And perhaps Yuming had a subtle feeling in his heart. Then, Zhong Mingtian took out the soul talisman again. When the soul talisman fireball appeared, Zhong Mingtian's body shook slightly, and even a layer of bruise flashed across his face. "Junior Feng," Zhong Mingtian shouted, and Feng Qing understood. She grabbed her hand, and Xiao Mao's body was lifted into the air. Just as Feng Qing was about to activate the flying sword under her feet, she suddenly heard Yuming shout, "Who is it?" Feng Qing was stunned and turned to look at Yuming. She saw that Yuming's eyes were looking at the hole, and there was a strange expression in his eyes. However, when Feng Qing looked at the hole again, it was still calm, and there was no movement at all. At this moment, Xiao Mao, who had been listless all this time, suddenly flashed with a violent brilliance, and the sword light that was binding him also broke inch by inch. Humph! Yu Ming snorted coldly, and with a sway of his body, he appeared in front of Xiao Mao. His wings flapped, and countless rays of light shot out and surrounded Xiao Mao. The force of the rays of light trapped Xiao Mao, and no matter how Xiao Mao struggled, it was useless. Junior Feng, Zhong Mingtian's roar had a trace of anger in it. Yes, Feng Qing didn't dare to be distracted, and with a shake of her feet, a slender flying sword that looked like an icicle appeared, and it directly pierced between Xiao Mao's angry eyes. However, just as the flying sword was about to pierce through, something strange happened. A strong force of imprisonment descended from the sky, and in an instant, the flying sword was frozen in place. Who are you? Feng Qing was puzzled, and she wanted to activate the sword again, but she heard Yu Ming angrily looking at her back from afar. Feng Qing was shocked, and her body involuntarily flew away, and at the same time, she looked around. This glance didn't matter, but she saw a young cultivator in the robes of the Imperial Thunder sect, who appeared less than 10 feet behind her. His slender eyes were slanted upward, and an indescribable murderous aura was emitted from his eyes. Moreover, just as Feng Qing turned her head, that cultivator rubbed his hands together, and a thick lightning bolt appeared out of nowhere and struck her forehead. Suddenly, a rumor uncontrollably grew in her mind. Terror. Terror Phoenix? Yes, the 3 characteristics of the Terror Phoenix. The first was its huge phoenix celestial body, the second was its slanted phoenix eyes, and the third was its proficiency in controlling lightning. This was something she had never seen before in the other Imperial Thunder sect disciples. Now, although the Imperial Thunder sect cultivator in front of her didn't show his phoenix celestial body, Feng Qing still shouted with lingering fear, "Terror Phoenix?" Yu Ming was also shocked and immediately thought of Ling Yunwu, but Xiao Hua ignored him as if he didn't know Xiao Mao and didn't want to look at Xiao Mao. The thunder palm, which was several times thicker than an ordinary cultivator's, struck one toward Feng Qing and the other toward Zhong Mingtian. Poor Zhong Mingtian, who was trying her best to support the soul talisman, saw the huge lightning bolt coming and hurriedly wanted to activate the flying sword to meet the enemy. But the incomparable exhaustion in her soul rushed to her heart, and the smooth sword essence became sluggish, and the sky blue sword light that flew out like a snow bamboo slowed down a little. With just this slight delay, the lightning bolt hit her, and this was the result of Zhong Mingtian's dodging, and the thunder palm only hit her back. But what was the difference between hitting the back and hitting the forehead? The sky blue sword light around Zhong Mingtian flashed, and was immediately annihilated, and a bloody hole the size of a bowl appeared on her back. Ah! Zhong Mingtian screamed, and fell from midair. She fell from midair, but the soul talisman's fireball went out of control again. It suddenly swelled up, and even let out a strange sound like a ghost wailing and a wolf howling. That sound resounded in the entire space, and it was probably the souls of many people. Run! Seeing Zhong Mingtian die in just one move, Feng Qing was even more frightened, and the flying sword suddenly flew out, turning into thousands of ice spikes, and rushed toward Xiao Hua's thunder palm. Unfortunately, although these ice spikes were powerful, Xiao Hua's thunder palm was even more turbulent, and that lightning bolt poured down like a waterfall, and the thousands of ice spikes were like little grass in the water, floating. Chapter 24-22. What was even more inconceivable to Feng Qing was that Xiao Hua's figure swayed in the lightning, almost blinding her eyes. Feng Qing knew that Xiao Hua was going to attack her, but her Naiwan palace suddenly felt an incomparable stabbing pain. That pain was like her own ice-thorn flying sword piercing her forehead. Immediately after, a stick as thick as a bowl landed on her forehead. She could only hear a pu sound in her ears, and everything in this world stopped. Seeing Xiao Hua smoothly kill the two illusionary sword disciples of the Bright Sword sect, Yu Ming sucked in a breath of cold air. When Xiao Hua's gaze fell on the green calabash and looked at him again, he suddenly flapped his wings, and a completely blue and white light suddenly flew out. However, the direction of the light was not Xiao Hua, nor was it the imprisoned Xiao Mao. It was the soul talisman fireball that was getting bigger and bigger. Puff! The fireball suddenly exploded, turning into dozens of pieces that flew into the air, separating Xiao Hua from himself. Then, his figure flew towards the direction of the cave entrance. Yu Ming, this bird cultivator who could stand shoulder to shoulder with Feng Buping, actually wanted to escape. Where do you think you're going? Xiao Hua clapped his hands, and the tidal bead flashed a light blue brilliance and flew out. The blue innate true water gushed out from the tidal bead, firmly blocking the entrance of the cave. Moreover, what made Feng Buping even more surprised was that the soul talisman fireball that exploded into dozens of pieces actually automatically flew to his left and surrounded him. What's going on? Yu Ming turned pale with fright. However, his figure was still not slow. With a flap of his wings, he suddenly flew away from Xiao Hua. Give me your life. Xiao Hua used the wind escape technique, and the wishful staff was also raised. The soul talisman fireball was urged by his soul silk to block in front of Yu Ming. Yu Ming's wings shone brightly, and with a schwa sound, they all shot toward Xiao Hua. At the same time, he also blocked most of the soul talisman fireballs. However, in his haste, he did not pay attention to a small fireball on top of his head that was smaller than a little finger, and all of a sudden, it sank into the back of his head. However, the protective brilliance on his body didn't have any effect at all. Seeing the thousands of fine rays shooting towards him, the power of imprisonment and the sharp force cutting through the air, Xiao Hua did not dare to be negligent and hurriedly waved the wishful steel staff to protect himself. Yu Ming had already flown to a part of the rock wall by the time all the fine lights were shot down. Kill! Xiao Hua was a little anxious. He didn't know why Yu Ming flew over, but since he flew over, there must be a purpose. He tried his best to urge the wind escape, and in the blink of an eye, he caught up behind Yu Ming. At the same time, a palm of thunder struck out, and the wishful staff also hit his back. At this moment, Yu Ming let out an angry roar and turned around. His face was abnormally ferocious. A large bird that looked like a rain sparrow appeared from his body. The wings of the rain sparrow were over 100 feet wide. Blue and white light violently surged between the feathers. The water-type heaven and earth spirit energy that was already surging in the air was swept up like a hurricane. Woo-woo! Within the hurricane, fist-sized crystals had already formed. These crystals contained an enormous amount of power. Xiao Hua knew that this Yu Ming could be together with Feng Buping, and his means were not ordinary. He was already prepared in his heart, but seeing the crystal grains within 100 feet, he was even more shocked. He could use the wind escape and other magical powers to deal with Feng Buping, but against Yu Ming, what good means did he have? Apart from a spiritual fire, he was afraid that there was only the flying sword. If the wishful staff could stretch 100 feet, it would naturally be effective, but it was a pity that the staff was now only 3 feet. It's a little strange. Xiao Hua was thinking about how to break through the 100 feet of crystal grains to kill Yu Ming, but he saw that Yu Ming's magic did not seem to be targeted at him. The crystal grains sat cross-legged in the hurricane. Although it was powerful, it did not hit him. Instead, there was a faint tendency to hit Yu Ming himself. Looking at Yu Ming's expression again, it was extremely ferocious and also extremely painful. His body was tumbling in midair, and the light of his feathers was blindly scattered. That's the fire of the soul talisman. Xiao Hua suddenly woke up. He was originally hiding at the entrance of the cave, wanting to kill Yu Ming first, and then capture Feng Qing and Zhong Mingtian. However, he did not expect that Zhong Mingtian would make a move on Xiao Mao, and when he activated his spiritual power while hiding, it attracted Yu Ming's attention. Therefore, Xiao Hua killed Zhong Mingtian and Feng Qing first. What Xiao Hua did not expect was that Yu Ming would actually detonate the fire of the soul talisman and escape himself. Xiao Hua had already read the content of the blood sacrifice on the way here. Although it was rough, he also knew that this was a soul cultivator's talisman. His soul should be useful. He took it and tested it, and it was true. The fire of the soul talisman was turned around to deal with Yu Ming. That little bit of fire of the soul talisman was not Xiao Hua's doing. It was the result of a coincidence. Looking at Yu Ming's pain and struggling appearance, he should be fighting with the soul talisman. Feng Buping can dodge the soul stab. This Yu Ming must also have some tricks. This soul talisman only entered his brain a little bit. Not necessarily. Just when Xiao Hua was pondering, Yu Ming's face suddenly relaxed. Ha ha ha, terrifying phoenix. Ha ha ha, terrifying phoenix. How can you be this old man's opponent? While speaking, the brilliance on the wings increased again. Almost double the size of the crystal beads covered Xiao Hua. Xiao Hua frowned. His figure swayed. Using the hurricane between the crystal beads, he used the wind escape technique to rush towards Yu Ming from the gaps between the crystal beads. Rumble. A burst of earth-shattering noise was continuous. All the crystal beads exploded in an instant. This old bird doesn't want to live anymore. Xiao Hua hurriedly retreated. The explosion of the crystal beads produced a strong, tearing force around him at the same time. Not only did it break his protective brilliance, it also tore the Taoist robe he just changed into. He was in an even more sorry state than before when he was bare-armed. Fortunately, Xiao Hua's wind escape technique was considered powerful. When he revealed his figure, he was already 100 zhang away. Although his face was pale gold and there were some bloodstains on the corner of his mouth, other than his body being almost naked, there weren't too many wounds. Ha, terrifying phoenix. How can you be this old man's opponent? Yu Ming shouted almost crazily. There were also faint bloodstains on the corner of his mouth. However, Yu Ming's following action made Xiao Hua even more puzzled. This old bird actually used his divine ability on a huge spike not far away. He blasted off the tip of the spike. Moreover, his mouth was still shouting, "Terrifying phoenix, how can you be this old man's opponent?" This guy. Xiao Hua saw Yu Ming's almost scattered eyes. He suddenly realized, this guy is crazy. No, he's not crazy. It's the soul talisman that made his soul. At the same time, when Xiao Hua realized, Yu Ming suddenly rushed straight towards the high-altitude rock wall. His mouth was still shouting, "Terrifying phoenix, how can you be this old man's opponent, Wang?" A huge rumbling sound rang out, and Yu Ming quickly rushed into the rock wall. The rock wall emitted a faint ripple, and Yu Ming's figure disappeared. It can't be. Could it be that this old bird is playing tricks? Xiao Hua was shocked. He hurriedly flew in front of the rock wall, where Yu Ming disappeared. However, he saw that there was a huge crystal pillar on the rock wall. Where could Yu Ming's figure be seen? And beside the crystal pillar, the various colors of the six-petaled crystals were still shining. Go! Xiao Hua hurriedly used the earth escape technique and rushed towards that crystal pillar. Dang! A sound rang out. Xiao Hua's head collided with it. It almost gave birth to a big bump. Damn it, Xiao Hua woke up. This was definitely not a rock pillar. However, after Xiao Hua took out both the fire escape technique and the wood escape technique to test, he was disappointed. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to catch up to Yu Ming no matter what. I'm really unlucky, Xiao Hua secretly said. This young master is already 1,000 times more careful, but I still let a bird cultivator escape. This young master's name, Sai. I'm afraid that Senior Feng Buping will know. Perhaps this is why there is no such thing as an impermeable wall in this world. Xiao Hua sighed and landed. Seeing that there were no more abnormalities nearby, he flew over and grabbed with his hand. Crack! Bang! Bang! The restrictions that Yu Ming placed on Xiao Mao's body earlier were all broken by Xiao Hua. And because Xiao Mao's figure landed, it was precisely between the spikes. He did not receive any damage from Yu Ming's crystal. Big brother, Xiao Mao had already seen Xiao Hua. Seeing Xiao Hua use his divine ability, his eyes were filled with gratitude. However, he saw that Xiao Hua did not look at him. He knew that he was afraid of attracting the attention of Yu Ming and the others. Thus, he did not dare to struggle. Only at this moment did he jump up. He bowed down and shouted, "Big brother saved this little brother's life again. Get up." Xiao Hua's voice was not angry but mighty. A man's knees can bow to heaven and earth, can bow to his parents. Others do not need to bow, even if it is a brother. Yes, this little brother understands. Hearing Xiao Hua call himself brother, Xiao Mao was overjoyed. He immediately jumped up from the ground and looked at Xiao Hua with a smile. "Damn it, you've seen all of me." Xiao Hua chuckled as he formed hand seals. He immediately disappeared and reappeared in a moment. He had already changed into a new Taoist robe. Xiao Mao's eyes flashed with a strange color. He looked at Xiao Hua with admiration. "Sai, you've finally grown up." Xiao Hua looked at the wind and frost on Xiao Mao's face and the slightly white hair on his temples. He sighed and said, "When this Xiao saw you, you were practically still a drooping child. He, on the other hand, Big Brother's appearance is still the same. This little brother is truly envious." Xiao Mao actually did not mind. His cultivation was difficult and dangerous. The hardships he suffered were not known to ordinary cultivators. He had long been accustomed to it. "TCH, what's so good about it?" As Xiao Hua spoke, he clapped his hand and took out a face-retaining pill and threw it to Xiao Mao. "You'll know what's bad about it after taking it." "Yes." Xiao Mao received the face-retaining pill without hesitation. He opened his mouth and swallowed it. "Sweat, you're not going to ask what kind of pill it is?" Xiao Hua was also slightly stunned. Chapter 24-23. Xiao Mao honestly replied, "Since Big Brother bestowed it to me, little brother would never dare to refuse. That's why I didn't ask." "Ha ha, good boy, good job." Xiao Hua was very happy in his heart. During this period of time, he had saved Cui Hongshun countless times and was even contradicted by that guy. How could he compare to Xiao Mao's understanding? Brothers are brothers. When the ageless pill's medicinal power was produced, Xiao Mao felt faint lightning flickering in his meridians. He was somewhat puzzled. Xiao Hua ignored him and looked at the azure-skinned gourd on top of the huge spike. That violent vibration had already come to an end. The brilliance was also somewhat dim. Xiao Hua then looked at the majority of the remaining yellow talisman fireball in the air. His eyes turned, and he had an idea. "Get up." Xiao Hua grabbed with his hand, and Zhong Mingtian's body flew up from the ground. "Go." Xiao Hua pointed his hand, and the soul strand drove the fireball into Zhong Mingtian's forehead. Zhong Mingtian was only at the brink of death after being struck by Xiao Hua's lightning palm. When the yellow talisman fireball entered her body, it really rejected her soul that was about to disappear. Zhong Mingtian's expression immediately became sinister. Her already drowned consciousness also suddenly woke up. The pain she previously inflicted on the 6 Dao sect cultivators was also tasted one by one before she died. Rise. Zhong Mingtian was heavily injured. Even if the potential in her body was completely stimulated, how powerful could she be? Seeing her like a dying light, Xiao Hua pointed his hand, and the soul talisman fireball came out from the top of Zhong Mingtian's head. Zhong Mingtian's entire body was covered in bruises. With a plop, she fell to the ground and was piled up together with the female cultivator from Xuanyan School. At this moment, the two could no longer distinguish between friend and foe. "Go." Xiao Hua's face was similarly grave. His soul strand carefully pulled the soul-sucking fireball. Although Zhong Mingtian's soul struggled with all its might inside the fireball, it seemed to be unable to break free from Xiao Hua's control. The azure-skinned gourd seemed to have some kind of intelligence. Without waiting for the soul talisman fireball to reach its head, it immediately emitted a green brilliance. The suction force at the mouth of the gourd greatly increased, and the fluctuations also rapidly shook. However, when the blood ball entered the green gourd, the entire gourd suddenly became still like before. It no longer vibrated, and the fluctuations disappeared. However, the suction force from the head of the gourd increased greatly, and a huge amount of light blue light rushed into it. Xiao Mao looked at all of this with his mouth agape. He didn't know how Xiao Hua could understand all of this. Yes, it will be done in an hour. Xiao Hua clapped his hands as he spoke. In his heart, he was also somewhat apprehensive. That supreme light azure sword had flown out for a long time. The sword transformation swordsman would probably rush over soon. However, calculating the time at Chicken Cry Mountain, this half an hour should be enough to wait. Big brother, what are you doing? Xiao Mao finally asked in a low voice. Haha, this is the yin-yang sword spirit of a sword cultivator. It seems like it's meant to be used against my Dao sect cultivators. I'm only an hour away from refining it. Xiao Hua didn't try to hide anything. As he spoke, he pointed at the tidal bead guarding the entrance of the cave. A wave of sparkling, innate primordial water was sucked into the bead and landed on his hand. I see. Xiao Mao's heart trembled as he looked at the many corpses under the spikes. How should we deal with these? Is that female cultivator a disciple of your Xuanyan school? Xiao Hua pointed and said, if you want to take her corpse away, put it in your storage pouch. As for the other cultivators you don't know, take them out of here and bury them outside. Yes. Xiao Mao nodded. He put away the cultivator's corpse, then looked at the two sword cultivators. What about these two? AI, bury them together. Xiao Hua sighed. In the great battle of the Tao of the sword, both swordsmen and cultivators are helpless. Yes, little brother understands. A trace of warmth flashed through Xiao Mao's eyes. Oh, take all the storage pouches. Xiao Hua still didn't forget to say. 2 hours later, in a corner of Yin-Yang Twin Springs Mountain, in a rather large pit, the corpses of close to 20 swordsmen and cultivators were neatly placed there. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Fellow Taoists and the swordsmen of Huan country, you were enemies when you were alive. Now that you've all become ghosts, don't fight anymore and become ghost cultivators. Fellow sword cultivators, don't blame this young master. The heavenly Tao is dissatisfied with the cycle of karma. Everything is decided by the heavens. Rest in peace. Xiao Hua didn't know if what he said was true or false. After saying a few words, he waved his hand, and a large amount of snow mixed with soil piled on top of everyone's corpses, slowly burying them. Xiao Mao watched from the side with curiosity. The sword cultivators that he had killed had all been burned or casually thrown away, but he had never been so serious about it. He waited until he flew up into the air with Xiao Hua before he carefully asked, Big brother, since you're so kind, why don't you just leave the corpses of these sword cultivators underground and wait for the sword cultivators to come and find them and bring them back to their respective sects? Why do you have to go through so much trouble? Xiao Hua laughed as he flew. Kindness is something that must be done, whether it's towards sword cultivators or cultivators. But Big brother definitely won't do something that brings trouble to himself. If we leave their corpses where they are, when the swordsmen come, they will definitely investigate their injuries. In this way, won't they know everything about Big Brother's methods? The next time we meet the sword cultivators of Huan country, won't Big Brother be at a disadvantage? So that's how it is. Xiao Mao clapped his hands and laughed. Big Brother really isn't a stickler for formalities. As he spoke, Xiao Mao's gaze casually swept across the frozen lake below them. They were very close to the surface of the ice, and their appearances were reflected on the surface of the ice like a real mirror. He was very shocked by his own appearance. Then, Xiao Mao stretched out his hand and waved it in front of his eyes. A circular mirror appeared in front of him. Looking at his dark sideburns and white and tender face in the mirror, Xiao Mao was stunned. After a moment, he looked at Xiao Hua and said in surprise, Big brother, is this a rejuvenation pill? Who knows? Xiao Hua shrugged. I got it from someone else's storage bag. It looks similar to the rejuvenation pill that was auctioned in Sky Patrol City last time. Big brother has no use for it, so I'm just giving it to you to try. This? Xiao Mao's eyes turned slightly, and he said somewhat embarrassedly, "Is there more in the storage bag?" Xiao Hua was even more stunned, but then he nodded and said, "There's one more. If you want two, that won't do." "That's great, just one will do," Xiao Mao said anxiously. "Who is it for?" Xiao Hua asked with a smile. Xiao Mao's white and tender face was now slightly red, and he said in a low voice, "It's for the sect." Hearing Xiao Mao's voice that was as soft as a mosquito's, Xiao Hua laughed. He clapped his hands and took out another face-retaining pill and said, "Forget it, we'll talk about it when we meet." Okay, Xiao Mao was relieved and explained, "She's not in Sky Patrol City now. When there's a chance, I'll definitely let her come and meet Big Brother." But just as Xiao Mao reached out to take the jade bottle, Xiao Hua withdrew his hand and asked thoughtfully, "Could it be that you don't even want Big Brother to know her name?" Hee. Xiao Mao smacked his lips and said embarrassedly, "Her name is Qin Jian." "What Qin Jian?" Xiao Hua was stunned. There were many people with the same name in this world. She might have the same name as the illusory swordsman of Huan country, Qin Jian. This disciple of Xuanyin school was a little unlucky. "It's not the sword from Flying Sword." Xiao Mao naturally knew Xiao Hua's surprise and hurriedly explained, "It's the Jian from Healthy. I didn't want to say it just now because of this." Ha ha ha! Xiao Hua stuffed the jade bottle into his hand and laughed. "Who cares if her name is the same or not? Even if it's the same, so what? When Big Brother kills Qin Jian, won't Xiao Yu continent only have Qin Jian from Xuanyin school left?" Hee. Big Brother wants to kill Qin Jian? Xiao Mao's face showed envy. "Why? You're interested too?" Xiao Hua looked at Xiao Mao and asked. "Yes," Xiao Mao replied, but he was a little regretful. "Unfortunately, my cultivation is too low and can't help Big Brother much. You're already in the middle stage of foundation establishment. You're even stronger than Big Brother. Why can't you help?" Xiao Hua smiled. Hee. Xiao Mao naturally knew that Xiao Hua hid his cultivation, but he didn't point it out. He smiled apologetically. "Even if I'm in the middle stage of foundation establishment, killing Qin Jian is still difficult. Also, I just broke through to the middle stage of foundation establishment. It's nothing." "Oh, you just broke through? Why didn't you return to Xuanyin school?" Xiao Hua asked curiously. Xiao Mao shook his head and said, "Master said that the battlefield is the best opportunity to raise one's cultivation. He won't let me return to Xuanyin school until the battle ends. Motherfucker, there's still this kind of master." Immediately, Xiao Hua felt that his extremely harsh master was helpless and close to him. Xiao Mao smiled. "This is also because master is good to me. I entered the middle stage of foundation establishment on the battlefield. If I was in Xuanyin school, I might not be able to succeed even after a few more years. Furthermore, my cultivation has improved a lot during this period of time." Xiao Hua nodded and asked again, "Have you been practicing that secret technique?" "Yes," Xiao Mao always wanted to say, but he knew that it was Xiao Hua's secret. If Xiao Hua didn't mention it, he also didn't dare to rashly mention it. "Thanks to Big Brother's secret technique, not only did I benefit a lot in my cultivation, I also used that secret technique to escape with my life many times. Do you have any questions?" Xiao Hua asked again. "Yes," Xiao Mao answered without hesitation, his face filled with joy. "Good, say it." Xiao Hua nodded. "Big Brother will give you a few pointers." "Great. I've been looking forward to this day for a long time." Xiao Mao almost jumped up. Then, Xiao Mao spoke of the many questions that were engraved in his mind one by one. Xiao Hua patiently explained them one by one, and also talked about the slightly more profound dragon transformation art. Xiao Mao was so excited that he scratched his ears and cheeks. Seeing that Xiao Mao was so eager to learn, Xiao Hua simply didn't sleep or rest, flying and talking at the same time. The next evening, Xiao Hua was answering Xiao Mao's questions with a smile, when suddenly a kind of palpitation surged in his heart. Xiao Hua quivered and immediately felt that something was wrong. He grabbed Xiao Mao's hand and said anxiously, "Quickly fly back." "No, fly to the left." Just as the two of them flew a few hundred feet, A powerful divine sense swept over from the direction of Sky Patrol City. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.